Chapter 754. With the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the plane barrier had become weaker and weaker. Yeenagu, the king of gnolls, must have some way to track the traces of the flail of time. Otherwise, his followers would not appear twice. The last time Autumn Fall was attacked, it was related to the flail of time. This time, there were traces of the gnolls from the abyss. He didn't know how many parts of the flail of time the king of gnolls had gotten, and whether there were any special guys among his followers this time. Soren fell behind and followed after him. He didn't dare to get too close, because the legendary monk's perception was also good. Soren was not afraid of being detected by conventional means, but by the sixth sense. This was the most unreasonable anti-detection method, and the only way Soren could not avoid it. The sixth sense was a supernatural domain. Sometimes, even the gods couldn't do anything if they sensed something purely with their sixth sense. A woo. Suddenly, there was a wolf howl in the quiet night, followed by continuous traces of fighting in front of them. There were also faint screams of people. Ah! Accompanied by a scream of horror, a middle-aged man dressed as a monk was directly torn in half. The fight was only a matter of a moment. When this group of people found out, they had already fallen into the enemy's encirclement. Gnoll assassins. All of them had dark hair, and their physique was taller than the gnolls in the material plane, but their movements were unusually agile. When these monks fell into their encirclement, they were surprised to find that the number of enemies was far more than they had imagined. These gnolls exuded a terrifying aura, which was definitely not something that creatures from the material plane could possess. Only the demon blood in the abyss could exude such a dangerous aura. It's the Gnoll King's personal guard. Soren noticed the difference between these tall gnolls at a glance. They had a special emblem on them. This emblem came from the ancient city of Yeenagu, which was the central city on the 422nd floor of the abyss. The gnolls in front of him seemed to be called wild trackers. They were usually responsible for capturing slaves escaping from the abyss, including middle and high-grade demon slaves. They would only be dispatched for very important missions in Yeenagu, and these gnolls' profession levels were all above level 18. In other words, they were all quasi-legendary level monsters. These annoying fellows. Kill them all. In the center of the group of gnoll assassins, there was a burly gnoll leader that was more than 3 meters tall. It held a 3-headed flail in its right hand and a flail that emitted cold air in its left hand. It was the same model. With just a glance, Soren could tell that it was one of the parts of the flail of time. However, it wasn't the poison head that Soren obtained. Instead, it was the ice head. A woo. The gnoll assassins from all directions instantly pounced on them. Streaks of dark, cold light appeared, and poisoned short swords attacked the pursuing monks from all angles. These gnolls were incredibly fast. Almost all of them had agility above 25. This meant that they were the direct descendants of the king of gnolls, and it was not ruled out that some of them had his blood. For the demon lord, their descendants were also important subordinates. These descendants were far stronger than other demons. Sun Flame Form. Facing the attack of the high-grade gnoll assassins, the leading legendary monk finally couldn't do anything. He took a few steps back and used his ultimate skill. With a rumbling explosion, the terrible flames directly blew away the nearby high-grade gnoll assassins. Although the people he brought with him were strong, almost all of them were weaker than these high-grade gnoll assassins. In the whole team, only Cicada and Blade Master had reached profession level 18. Most of the others were between profession level 15 and 16. They were professions that had just advanced. In the battle, these people were obviously suppressed. If their casualties were too high, they would fall into the siege of these high-agility enemies. Even the monk was not sure if he could escape. After using Sun Flame Form to blow away the nearby enemies, the legendary monk instantly rushed to the gnoll leader in front of him. The gap between the two sides was too big. He could only fight now. Capture the gnoll leader first. There might be a turning point if he took down the gnoll leader. You don't know what's good for you. Facing the sudden attack of the legendary monk, the gnoll leader's mouth showed a contemptuous smile. He directly roared and waved his three-headed flail. Bull's strength. Evil shadow strike. Berserk. 3 spells appeared in a row. While swinging his three-headed flail at the legendary monk in front of him, the gnoll leader still had the strength to point forward and directly threw a spell into the crowd. Law command, awe. In an instant, several people in the crowd stood still in a daze. The nearby high-level Jack-Allen assassins instantly pounced on them and chopped off their heads with one slash. Not good. This is the chosen of the King of Knoll. In the darkness, Soren's eyes narrowed. He had realized that the legendary monk was probably dead. Although the King of Knoll, Yeenagu, was a demon lord, he also had part of the Knoll race's priesthood. However, he had not really become a god. He was a demon lord at the level of a false god. Most of his chosen were his direct descendants. These chosen were given a part of his divine power. When necessary, they could become his incarnation. There was no doubt. These abilities were not something that an ordinary gnoll could perform. Yeenagu might have incarnated into him. Shadow hide. Shadow leap. Soren was ready to attack in an instant, but when he was about to deal with the gnoll leader in front of him, the nearby high-grade gnolls had already killed several monks. 3 of them realized the danger of Cicada and rushed over to kill her first. At this time, Soren was faced with a dilemma. If he wanted to save the legendary monk, he could not save Cicada. If he saved Cicada, the legendary monk would not know that the enemy was Yeenagu's incarnation. He might be killed in a round of attacks. The hesitation was only for a moment. Soren's figure appeared behind Cicada in an instant, then he picked her up with one hand and threw her back. Sword form, spinning strike. With the strange silver-white sword light all over the sky, the high-grade gnolls who rushed in front of Soren froze in place. The next moment, the 3 high-grade gnolls were directly cut into pieces. Behind him was Cicada, who was shocked. It seemed that she still did not know where Soren came from. Cicada was saved. However, just as Soren was rescuing Cicada, there was an accident on the legendary monk's side. Chapter 755. Shadow Step. Just at the moment of the fight, the legendary monk noticed that something was wrong. The strength and agility of the opponent were too amazing. This was not a power that a mortal could have at all. The legendary monk tried to use Shadow Step to open the distance, but at this moment, the gnoll leader waved his hand and released a spell. Dimensional Lock. The surrounding space was blocked, and the next moment, the figure of the legendary monk flew out. Poochie. With blood gushing out, the legendary monk was directly killed in one move. His whole chest had caved in, and perhaps even his heart had been smashed. In this case, it was impossible to survive. You don't know what's good for you. Yeenagu's avatar took back the 3-headed flail in his hand, but then his eyes turned to the other side of the battlefield, where a figure suddenly appeared, and he noticed the disturbing breath of the gods on that figure. Back off. Soren glanced at the shocked Cicada behind him and said slowly, "This level of battle is not something you can intervene in." Inexplicably. As soon as Soren's voice fell, Cicada involuntarily stepped back. Even she did not understand why she trusted the person she had just met so much. She did not doubt his orders at all. It felt like she trusted the person in front of her so much that she could not disobey his orders. Yeenagu's avatar. A smile appeared at the corner of Soren's mouth, and he said to himself, "It seems that my luck is not bad. The avatar of a demon lord should have a lot of divinity, right?" The situation of the battlefield was reversed in an instant. The protagonist who decided the outcome was Soren and Yeenagu's avatar in front of him. If Soren won, the others would naturally survive. If Soren lost, the others would not survive. The god of half-elves and rogues. A glimmer of divinity appeared in the eyes of Yeenagu's avatar, and then his expression became a little fearful. Although he had never seen Soren, he could still tell who Soren was by relying on the light of divinity. Soren did not have the domain of mystery, craftiness, concealment, and so on. In the face of Yeenagu's avatar, he could not completely hide his priesthood, especially in a battle. Yenaga's avatar could guess Soren's identity, but he couldn't see through Soren's strength. She didn't know that Soren was also a wizard, but since Soren was the god of rogues, she guessed that Soren's strength was mostly in the rogue side. Shadow hide. Soren's figure disappeared, and Yenaga's avatar looked around nervously. He could not see through Soren's invisibility. But he also had his own way, which was the gnoll's sense of smell. Yenaga's sense of smell was far beyond that of ordinary creatures. In an instant, he detected a trace and roared, "Found you! Die!" The three-headed flail directly smashed into the darkness on the right side. Yenaga was confident enough to suppress the enemy in strength. As long as the enemy was injured and bleeding, he could completely rely on the smell of blood to locate the target. Boom! A sharp sound rang out. The three-headed flail did not come to a physical body. The next moment, Yenaga's avatar felt something was wrong and instantly smashed the flail, ice, in his left hand behind him. It still felt like he hit the air. Soren's chuckle came as if he was mocking Yenaga's incompetence. "Damn you! Don't hide. Come out and fight with me." Yenaga's avatar was so angry that his eyes were red, but there was no way to locate Soren's figure at all. However, he was an old demon lord after all, and he was not too deeply affected by the will of chaos. In an instant, his eyes turned to Cicada not far away. He had just seen Soren save this human girl, so this human girl should be very important to Soren. So, Yenaga's avatar roared and rushed to Cicada not far away. "Since I can't find you, I'll find a way to force you out. If you don't come out, the girl I just saved will die." The avatar of the King of Gnolls thought very well. But he underestimated one thing. That was, although Soren was a wandering god, he was not without the ability to fight head-on. Although he could be called a rogue, he was basically a berserker when it came to fighting. Greater haste. Stone to mud. The avatar of the King of Gnolls was just about to rush to Cicada not far away. Suddenly, he found that the ground under his feet became very soft. With his huge body, he almost instantly sank down. Even if he reacted quickly and jumped out, his movements could not help but slow down by half a beat. Turning his head, the ground within 10 meters around him had become soft mud. Soren used magic to turn it into a mud pit to temporarily stop him. Although it only delayed the target for about a second, it was more than enough for him. Shadow Leap. Isaac's Missile Storm. Secondary Missile Storm. Melf's Acid Arrow. A storm of spells rained down on Soren, almost forming a terrifying barrage. The spells in Soren's memory were mainly those with short casting times. After obtaining the Lich Ring, which increased the casting speed of spells, the spells in his memory were mostly those that could be cast instantly. Hundreds of arcane missiles came wildly. There were also other second and third circle spells mixed in. Yenaga's avatar was not in the form of a saint, so it was impossible for him to be immune to low-level spells. Under the massive attack frequency, his whole body was almost drowned. Shadow Tentacles, Spell Enhancement. More than a dozen tentacles made of energy appeared and entangled the feet of Yenaga's avatar in an instant. Although the enemy soon succeeded in breaking free, it still slowed down the next movement. Soren's sword came. With a strange silver light, the curved sword cut directly to the vital part of the King of Gnolls. Abyss Legion. The Shadow of Death made Yenaga's avatar use his most powerful ability without hesitation. His avatar could have a part of his own power, but his most powerful ability was to summon the demons of the abyss. A portal opened. The breath of a high-grade demon appeared, and there was a faint stench of ghouls. Elemental Legion. Demon Avatar. Since the enemy had already used their ultimate skills, Soren naturally could not fight against all of them. Yenaga's avatar had thick skin. As the avatar of a demon lord, he was almost immune to instant death. He needed some helpers to clean up the demon army summoned by the enemy. Moreover, in terms of the ability to summon minions, Soren was confident that he would not lose to any demon lord. A raging fire appeared. When a giant earth elemental came out, a Balrog with flames all over its body also appeared. Let the flames purify everything. After the Balrog appeared, he raised his hand and threw out a fireball the size of a basin. When he saw the appearance of the Balrog, Cicada, who was not far away, was instantly stunned. Chapter 756. At this moment, everyone's mood was complicated. Yennega's avatar originally planned to use the unique Abyss Legion summon to turn the tables and kill Soren, but he did not expect the enemy to start summoning support. Those giant elementals that appeared in the material world through the elemental gate were easier to deal with, but the Balor that came out and shouted, "Let the flames purify everything," and at the same time, there was a trace of the demon lord's aura. The Balor was almost at the same level as a demigod. Challenge rating 22+. Even a demon lord like him might not be able to command more than a few, but the enemy in front of him could summon one at will, and it seemed like it did not cost much. Rumble. When the Balor appeared, it was a fireball the size of a wash basin, and then the surrounding temperature rose sharply. This Balor, who seemed to have the aura of a demon lord, directly rushed into the position where the Abyss Legion descended. It swung its huge beheading sword and launched a whirlwind strike. Yennega's demon subordinates didn't even have a chance to react. As soon as they walked out of the portal, they fell into a sea of fire, and then the huge beheading sword whistled. The power of the demon avatar was much higher than Soren's body, and the giant ghoul summoned was cut in half. Yennega's avatar was affected by a strong sense of crisis. On the other side, the other people's mood was quite complicated at the moment. At the moment when the legendary monk died, they suddenly realized that the enemy's strength was far beyond their imagination. Many people already had the feeling that they were going to die here. But then an unfathomable rogue suddenly appeared. The two sides fought for a while, and the enemy began to summon the Abyss Legion. The rogue suddenly became more capable of summoning than the spellcasters. Not only did he summon the Balor, but he also made a lot of elementals. Now the situation was about to become a war between demons. Cicada's mood should be the most complicated. As a human who signed a soul contract with the demon avatar, she had a strong feeling when Sauron came to the material plane. However, she had imagined countless ways to meet Sauron again, but she did not expect that the demon she had signed a contract with would be summoned by someone else in such a situation. Furthermore, it seemed to be a summon without any cost, because there was no delay when Soren summoned his demon incarnation. Through the spiritual thread of the soul contract, Cicada could sense that it maintained a weak connection with Soren. Slave contract. This was the biggest possibility the girl could think of. She couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile. In her opinion, the powerful Balrog Sauron had bound her with an enslavement contract, and Soren's control over his demon incarnation was similar to an enslavement contract. Who could enslave a powerful Balor? Thinking of this, Cicada's eyes lit up again. Although she did not understand the abyssal demon language of Yennegu, she guessed that Soren might be a god. If Soren was a true god, she began to understand the reason behind the strange changes that had been happening to her body recently. The battle was still going on. However, the situation of Yennegu's incarnation was getting worse and worse. If it weren't for the fact that he was a close combat demon lord, Soren would have already killed him. Even if he summoned the abyssal army, it was just a dying struggle. Sauron's demon incarnation had recently increased his strength. Because he was somewhat anxious, his demon incarnation was integrating with the power of the law of the abyss. That was to say, as a lord of the abyss, he could master a trace of the virtual divinity bestowed by the abyss. This was a special starting point, which was important for Soren's future plans. It was precisely because of this opportunity that the demon incarnation had reached the critical point of evolving into a Balor. Note: for details, please see Chapter 2 of the outer volume. Damn it! The god of half-elves and rogues. I will definitely take revenge. Yennegu's incarnation was finally close to death under Soren's attack. After all, the incarnation was not as good as the main body. Yennegu's main body had the domain of chaos, demonic, evil, and berserk, but the incarnation only inherited one of them, berserk. The main body's summoning of ghouls was a level 7 spell, the summoning of Tana Ri was a level 9 spell, the summoning of Knowles was a level 9 spell, and the summoning of the demon army was a legendary spell. However, the incarnation only had one summoning spell, and it was only a level 9 spell. This caused the huge army of the demon lord to completely lose its effect. When a real demon lord came, even if he did not open the abyss portal, it was enough to summon an army of demons within a day. Failure was inevitable. Yenaga's incarnation was now thinking about how to let the main body's consciousness retreat, abandon the body now, and ensure the return of a trace of the main body's soul was the most important thing for him. But Soren would never let the divinity in his hands fly away. Summon higher dryads. Yenaga's incarnation may have realized that failure was inevitable. He actually commanded the demons summoned by the Abyss Legion to rush towards Soren frantically, and then prepared to take advantage of the time to let the divinity of the main body withdraw from this body. The Balrog Sauron might be able to kill all the demons. But it was impossible to stop a large number of demons from rushing to Soren's death. At most, he could only trap the most powerful soul judgment demon with the flame whip, and then the other demons had already rushed to Soren's front. However, at this moment, an emerald green aura came from Soren's wrist, and then a beautiful woman in an emerald green dress appeared beside him. This woman looked like an elf, but her breath had the power of nature. She was the leader of the dryads in the misty forest, Karina. Plant, domain. The power of a domain was activated, but it was not Soren who activated it, but Karina who was standing beside him with a smile. The leader of the dryads seemed to be more powerful than when they first met. She was also one of the hosts of the ceremony, and she might have gained more benefits than other dryads. Now Karina had a trace of divinity on her body. She raised her hand and waved gently, and the plants around her grew wildly. The fragile green grass became tough vines. Not only did they ignore the flames of the demon incarnation, but they also trapped all the enemies in place. Nature's heal. A light full of vitality emerged. Under the emerald green magic aura, the leader of the dryads waved her hand and healed Soren and the others. She had advanced. It seemed that she had mastered the ability of a nature priest. As a dryad, she was actually a droll and a priest at the same time. Chapter 757. Sure enough, she was the darling of nature. It was the same, plant, domain, but Soren's effect was completely incomparable to Karina's ability. All the demons were trapped in place by the vines, and the nearby trees also came to life to trap the enemies with their branches. Soren had rushed to the front of Yenaga's incarnation in an instant, and his curved sword was accompanied by cold light all over the sky, directly slashing at the enemy's vital parts. Slaughter domain. Pucci. Blood gushed out from the wound. Just at the moment when Soren killed Yenaga's incarnation, a soul invisible to the naked eye emerged. This was the soul power from the Knoll King's body, and the divine power that Soren needed most at the moment. Die. The slaughter domain directly blocked the nearby space, and then Soren tried to activate a trace of the power of the death domain, and then in an instant, divine power surged wildly, directly targeting the Knoll King's soul projection as the target. No. A shrill scream sounded, and the soul projection of the King of Knolls was instantly cut into pieces. Not only did the scream come from the material plane, but even in the magnificent palace on the 422nd floor of the abyss, there was a roar full of anger and fear. Part of his soul was killed. If the incarnation of the demon lord was killed, it would affect its strength a little, and if even the soul projection did not come back, the problem would not be a reduction of strength. It would be a drop in level. At this time, a row of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Killed the incarnation of the Knoll King, Yenagu. Extracting the target's soul energy. You've gained 279,000 slaughter EXP. The target has the power of divinity. Extracting the target's power of divinity. You've gained 5 divinity. The target has the power of divinity. Extracting the target's power of divinity. You've gained 1 point of divinity. The incarnation of the demon lord did not have much slaughter EXP. The biggest gain from killing him was the 5 divinity points and the precious 1 point of divinity. Only by killing Yenagu's body could one obtain a huge amount of slaughter EXP. But the data did not stop, and new data prompts continued to appear below. The target has the aura of fear. Extracting target's fearsome spirit. Your ability, Spirit of Fear, has been strengthened. Obtained a trace of Divinity of Fear. Yenagu also has the Divinity of Fear? Could it be that after the death of the Dread Lord, he also seeped a trace of his domain into it? However, gnolls seem to be creatures that spread slaughter and fear to many races. It seemed that Yenagu's ambition was not small. There was a row of data prompts at the back. The target has Berserk Divinity. Divinity compatibility 31%. The compatibility with the main body was too low. Demon incarnation compatibility, 78%. Divine power conversion. Extract and transform the target's remaining violent divine power. The demon incarnation has mastered the Berserk domain. Domain power. With the death of Yenagu's avatar, a divine power that was rejected by Soren's body emerged. However, he couldn't absorb this power himself, but the demon incarnation had a good fusion ability. With a trace of divine light, the demon incarnation actually grasped the first domain ability. Berserk domain. The battle was over. The demons summoned by Yenagu were cleaned up, and Soren also cancelled the summoning of the demon incarnation. Now there was only the leader of the Dryads, Karina, by his side. He glanced at the other survivors, and then his eyes fell on the girl, Cicada, and the young Blade Master. After a moment of silence, Soren said slowly, "Let's get out of here first." The mage's hand. The artifact flail on the corpse of Yenagu's avatar fell into the palm of Soren. He quickly walked out, and the others looked at each other and followed. The movement here may have alarmed a lot of people, so it was better to leave here first. The artifact was in his hand. Soren had just gotten the flail of time, ice, and noticed a familiar divine power. It was the power of the massacre god. The flail of time used to be the most notorious weapon of the massacre god. When this weapon had 5 heads, it even killed the chief priest who had inherited most of the divine power of the massacre god. When it first got 3 heads, the flail of time had ended countless powerful enemies in the hands of the massacre god. Item type, flail of time, ice, incomplete. Item grade, grade 1 artifact. Item description, this is a part of a legendary artifact. Because the power of the other 4 parts is incomplete, the power it can exert is not as good as a legendary equipment. However, its potential is amazing. As one of the most powerful artifacts in the entire material plane, if anyone can gather all 5 heads of the flail of time, he can have the terrible power to kill gods and demons. The massacre god once used this weapon and killed the last enemy of the War of Gods with it. This weapon has been stained with God's blood, and there is a residual murderous aura on it. Note, this artifact still has the power of the massacre god. Requirements, strength 14 or above, strength requirement +2. Effects, artifact characteristic, God's blood, frost damage, armor break, cripple, +3 sharpness, +5 toughness, +10 armor break, +5 bone break. Weapon effect, artifact characteristic. This weapon is a legendary artifact. It cannot be destroyed by normal means and is also immune to disintegration. Only legendary, disintegration, has a 1% chance of destroying this artifact, but the one who destroys it must also suffer the backlash of the divine power. Weapon effect, God's blood. This weapon has been soaked in the blood of countless high-level demons, demigods, false gods, and even real gods. Some powerful beings who once coveted the massacre god's title also died in its hands. Even if this is only a part of the artifact, the flail of time is still soaked in the power of the god's blood. Weapon effect, frost damage. This is the ice head among the 5 heads of the flail of time. As only 1/5 of the parts have been repaired, this weapon can only exert a weak power. When it comes into contact with any enemy, it will cause an additional 5 frost damage to the target and affect the enemy's movement to a certain extent. Weapon effect, armor break. As a 5-headed flail of time, the flail of time has a terrible armor-breaking ability. Even if only one of the heads is equipped, it can easily break through most armor. Age Flail could ignore all armors below the Transcendence level, including full-body armors that couldn't block its attack. When the 5 heads of the Flail of Time are fully assembled, its armor-breaking ability will be further enhanced. Even legendary-level armor will not be able to protect it from damage. Weapon Effect, Cripple. The Flail of Time has a terrible lethality. When attacking the enemy, there is a certain chance of crippling the target directly. When the target is attacked by the Flail of Time, the target must undergo a compulsory test of toughness. Otherwise, the movement speed and attack speed will be reduced because of the cripple. The number of the heads of the Flail of Time determines the power of the ability. A familiar power. It was the power left behind by the Massacre bloodline on this divine weapon. The Flail of Time was in the era when the Massacre deity was active, and its wielder had killed many other Massacre deities. That was why Soren felt a trace of divine power from the Massacre domain on this weapon. Ice Head. Poison Head. Soren had now collected 2 parts of the Flail of Time. If he fused them together, the Flail of Time could become a Grade 2 divine weapon. Flail of Time, Ice, Poison. If he could get another head of the Flail of Time, then the Grade 3 divine weapon Flail of Time would surpass all the divine weapons in Soren's hands. The Holy Avenger's level was higher than the Flail of Time. However, if the Flail of Time with 5 heads was assembled, no other weapon would be able to deal more damage than it, and the damage would be more stable. This was because Soren remembered the effect of the Flail of Time with 5 heads. Each attack deals an additional 10 points of ice damage, 10 points of poison damage, 10 points of lightning damage, 10 points of fire damage, and 10 points of strong acid damage. Regardless of whether the user's strength was high or low, as long as the Flail of Time took a hit, the user would have to endure 50 points of additional attribute damage first. Chapter 758. Mordor City. It was a relatively busy and fulfilling day. Apart from the faint salted fish smell floating in the air above the city, there wasn't anything too troublesome. During this time, everyone was full. The price of fresh fish in the tavern had fallen to 1/3 of the original price. Basically, every household in the city of Mordor had stored some fresh fish, and the rest was urgently made into salted fish and air-dried fish. Soren could still make fish floss with some effort, but a god should not put his energy into it at all. Therefore, Mordor's way of dealing with fish floss was to make dried salted fish. This was the easiest way, and there was no need to worry about table salt in the coastal areas. Some of the low-grade wizard apprentices in the city of Mordor had already begun to study alchemy. For alchemy, purifying table salt was only the most basic thing. However, at present, the difficulty of purification was still relatively high. It was not a problem to make white table salt on a small scale. On a large scale, it was still slightly bitter sea salt. The high-level core of the city of Mordor did not have the energy and time to spend on such trivial matters. Maybe in the future, they would consider the application of high-end alchemy to the people's livelihood. This should be the best time for the slaves and laborers in the city of Mordor. Every day after work, they could eat enough. Not only could they eat fish for every meal, but they could also find a variety of fresh seafood from the big pot. At this time, people did not like to eat this stuff. Many of them were given to slaves as junk food. The days passed by like this. Counting with his fingers, it was getting closer and closer to the second wave of the abyss demons that Soren secretly told them. On this day, something happened in the city of Mordor. It was noon. Suddenly, a strange light appeared in the sky, and then this light crossed the sky like a meteor and fell directly to a row of buildings on the left side of the city of Mordor. Ha! In the half-elf temple in the center of the city of Mordor, the figure of the chief priest appeared out of thin air. She looked up at the sky with confusion and murmured, "Divinity from the sky." The pale golden light was not very conspicuous during the day. This light fell directly into a tall building, and then all the light disappeared as if everything just now was an illusion. Teleportation spell. The chief priestess, who was dressed in a white robe, instantly teleported to the spot where the divine light landed. Then she glanced at the Jian clan in front of her and murmured, "Saruman?" The location where the light of divinity fell was the second largest laboratory in Motor City. This was a forbidden area for ordinary people because there were many dangerous plants growing here. The light of divinity fell on the sky above Saruman's laboratory. With the strength of the chief priest, he could clearly see the pale golden light inside through the magic light. The radiance of divinity. At the same time, a ray of light also rose from the central mansion of Motor City, and then Gloria's figure also appeared next to the chief priest. What happened? Gloria's expression seemed a little confused. She had always been in charge of the defense circle of Mordor City, so the energy fluctuation just now could not escape her eyes. The chief priest's expression was rather solemn as he slowly said, "Saruman seems to have obtained some incredible opportunity." Gloria was startled when she heard this. She immediately sensed the changes in the laboratory. Alchemy laboratory. Saruman's expression at the moment was sluggish. Everything that just happened was completely instantaneous. Even he himself had not figured out what was going on until now. He only felt a trace of golden light falling into his body, and then his whole mind underwent an amazing change. It was as if his brain was suddenly enlightened. Many things that he did not understand before could now be understood clearly, and inexplicably, he had an extra spell. Heavenly spell. This was not a high-level spell, but it was not invented by Saruman. It was a spell given to him by God or the power of law. This. Saruman looked at his hands in surprise, and then his eyes fell on the test bench in front of him. This was a result of his recent research. A simpler and more efficient fertilizer. Because of the purification of alchemy, it seemed to have a hint of pale gold. These small particles were the crystallization of Saruman's third experiment. The yield and effect were much higher than the original simple fertilizer. Of course, these alchemy fertilizers were not for crops. As an ambitious wizard, how could Saruman be willing to be a farmer? He purified this fertilizer to further cultivate mutated plants. In short, this was a fertilizer with a trace of magic to improve one's combat power. But something unexpected happened. When this alchemy result was completed, he was directly reflected by a spell from the world, and at the same time, he faintly discovered that there was an extra trace of divinity in his body. Incredible. Although Saruman's strength improved rapidly after the research, divinity was still something that he yearned for. There was a trace of expectation in his heart. Saruman slowly pushed the door of the laboratory open. In front of him appeared the figure of the chief priest and Gloria. Even if he had just obtained a heavenly spell and a trace of divinity, Saruman still knew that he needed to remain humble at this moment. So he bowed slightly to the two legendary women in front of him and said, "Your Excellency Gloria. Your Excellency Chief Priest. Did the situation just now disturb you?" The chief priest saw more than Gloria. She smiled and said, "Congratulations. It seems that you have gone further than us." Saruman maintained his humility, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. He knew very well that even if he had obtained a trace of divinity, he was still an insignificant figure to the supreme ruler of Motor City, Soren. He had just obtained a new starting point, and he was still far away from the future. "Let's see what ability you have obtained." The chief priest smiled and turned her gaze to Gloria, who was a little confused, indicating that she would understand what happened next. Saruman nodded and said, "Yes. I also just realized something. Maybe the two of you can give me some pointers." Some small pale golden particles appeared in Saruman's palm. This was the result of his research. It was a more efficient fertilizer for cultivating magic plants, and it was also a casting material for a new spell he had just obtained. Incredible. The new spell was actually cast with this result as the core material. Fertility. A faint magic aura emerged. With the magic aura emerging from Saruman's body, the pale golden particles dissipated with the wind, and then turned into a little light and fell into the soil in front of him. There was no change. At least it seemed that there was no change, but the people present were not ordinary people. The chief priest's expression suddenly became serious, and then she smiled and said, "Congratulations." This was the second time she said congratulations. The ground did not seem to have changed much, but in fact, it had changed. The land had become more fertile. It wasn't an offensive spell. The effect of the spell was to use the experimental results that Saruman had just completed as materials to cast an effect similar to fertility, making the barren land more fertile. It did not look good. But the meaning of this was very deep. Because this belonged to the realm of the gods, Saruman's research had begun to feed back to the material plane. The Temple of Agriculture had taken away the first batch of fertilizers he had developed and had begun to promote them in many places. The field and clergy of the goddess of agriculture included fertility. On the other hand, the core of Saruman's god-given spell was a vague fertility. This was an ability that belonged to the fertile domain, but it was more of an unnatural domain. It was a result of human effort. This was the feedback of the laws and mortals. It seemed that the first batch of fertilizers that Saruman made had begun to give him some information that belonged to the realm of the gods. As the high priest who was in charge of the temple for Soren, the chief priest saw more things. What Saruman got was not just a spell and a little divinity, but a ladder that might allow him to become a god. Fertility, field. This seemed to be a new field. If Saruman could further affect reality and gain a little faith for himself, then he might be able to master the fertility, clergy. It was a priesthood that could affect all farming races. Maybe it was not strong enough. But for a mortal, it was already a great opportunity. Note, Saruman gained 1 point of divinity and the spell, fertility. The material plane had its own rules. Just like the droll, who was active in the desert of death all year round, they might be able to become tree shepherds, through natural feedback and master the plant, field. What happened to Saruman now was a kind of feedback from the material plane. It was a seemingly insignificant feedback. However, it was the ladder that Saruman used to become a god. This was the orthodox way for the natives of the material plane to ascend to godhood. After gaining this point of divinity, Saruman had the possibility to become a demigod. By influencing the entire material plane little by little, he could gradually accumulate the original divinity and then slowly transform into a demigod. Without the help of other gods, this process might take up to 100 years. After becoming a demigod, Saruman would need to establish a small church of his own or an organization that would serve and follow him. This way, he would slowly cultivate the power of divinity, and after 100 years, he would step into the realm of a false god. At this time, if he publicly announced that he was a god, he would be attacked by other churches as a false god. But if he continued to develop slowly and continued to spend hundreds of years accumulating his own strength and faith, when his existence had been known and accepted by more and more mortals and gods, Saruman, whose strength had reached the critical point, could ascend to godhood, master the fertility, field and clergy, and finally become a minor divine power, god. Of course, the premise of all this was that he could live, his divinity and field would not be plundered by other gods, and he would not die in the hands of powerful legendary adventurers. The time spent during this period could be as long as hundreds of years. In the long history of the material plane, there were also some mortals who became divine creatures through this opportunity, and then slowly entered the realm of gods. Some of the minor divine power gods in the Pantheon temple appeared in this way. However, these minor divine power gods were very weak. After becoming a true god, they often needed to serve and follow some powerful gods so that they could ensure their own safety and not be killed by other gods who coveted their power and clergy. If there was no avatar crisis, Saruman might have been absorbed by the gods with the fertility, clergy as their servant or subordinate god, just like the minor divine goddesses who were sheltered by the goddess of agriculture. One of them was the spiritual incarnation of nature, a minor divine goddess who was promoted from a divine water spirit hundreds of years ago. However, it was now the time of the Avatar crisis, a period of great danger but also full of opportunities. If Saruman could get the help of other gods, then the time for him to accumulate divinity and clergy would be greatly reduced. For some powerful gods, hundreds of years of accumulation was just a matter of spending a little power to promote. People like him who had the seed of divinity were far easier to become gods than other mortals, and the cost of promoting him was much smaller. Saruman had a very high starting point. But the foundation of this starting point was not stable. He must first master the power of the fertility realm before it was possible to further touch the realm of gods. As a wizard, Saruman was still a little weak. Although his strength had improved rapidly during this period, his wizard profession level was only about level 17, and there was still a long way to go before he could reach the realm of the legendary realm. Without touching the threshold of the legendary realm, it was difficult for him to become a real divine creature. Even with today's opportunity, he needed to make a lot of effort to enter the legendary realm, and then it was possible to peak at the threshold of the demigod realm. There was no doubt. Saruman was very lucky because it was the pantheon of agriculture who was responsible for promoting the fertilizer he made. The operation of a church was a bit special in itself, and it was naturally completely different for those mortals who were affected by the fertilizer. If these things were handed over to a chamber of commerce to operate, then the mortals who received the fertilizer would not have some belief changes that were biased towards the realm of gods. Saruman would not have been able to get the divinity that he had today, let alone peek into the realm of gods so easily. No matter what. He was indeed standing on a new level now. As a mortal who had the potential to become a god, the city of Moder would definitely give him more attention and resources in the future. P.S. 2 in 1 chapter. The extras have been updated. Chapter 759. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. It had been some time since he killed the incarnation of Yinagu, the king of gnolls. Although Soren saved the girl who signed a contract with the demon incarnation, he did not stay with her for too long. After spending a day talking to the young sword saint about the whirlwind, Soren was ready to deal with other things and return to Mordor as soon as possible. The flail of time, ice, naturally needed to be taken away. It was impossible for him to give this artifact to the monastery. As for the arrangement of Cicada, Soren naturally had a corresponding way. It could be regarded as planting his own line in the Eastern Kingdom. Mastering some of the Sword Saint's skills was not enough for Soren to get the information of the whirlwind again, but he had faintly touched the threshold. Perhaps it would not take long for him to understand it. The reason why Soren was in a hurry to go back was because of Saruman's opportunity. Gloria immediately sent a magic message to Soren, and Soren immediately realized that this was an opportunity. An opportunity to cultivate a god. The power that Saruman mastered should be related to the fertile domain. This domain ability could be compatible with most of the divine systems. Soren himself had the half-elf divine title. That was to say, the ability of farming could be planned within the scope of Soren's divine title. If Saruman had the potential to be cultivated, Soren intended to make him his own god. In other words, Soren would give him divinity and divinity to promote him to a minor divine power. In this way, Saruman's power came from Soren, and Soren could even take back this power when he paid a price. This kind of control was not very serious, but it was a win-win for both sides. After obtaining a new god, Soren was no longer alone. It was equivalent to establishing a divine system. A divine system. Perhaps it was still very far away for Soren now, but it was definitely not completely unimaginable. Soren's current divinity value was 90 points. Because he gave a part of the divinity to Vivian, he only had 36 points. His divinity value was very close to intermediate divinity. Although there was still a long way to go, it was not impossible to accumulate divinity after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. In this way, Soren could enter the range of intermediate divine power during the Avatar crisis. Intermediate divine power, which was almost the standard of a small divine system. When the goddess of ocean was still a medium divine power, she had already begun to cultivate her own gods and followers. One or two more reliable, weak divine power helpers were also very important for the struggle between the gods. Vivian was definitely going to become a god. At present, the little girl was trying her best to absorb the power of the divinity given by Soren. After all, the natives were still not comparable to him. Even if Vivian's talent was far beyond the level of the Son of God, it was still a bit difficult for her to integrate the power of the divinity and shorten the hundreds of years for others to a few months. At present, Vivian's integration progress was not fast. She was now between demigod and false god. If she wanted to really become a god, she had to jump out of the framework brought by the talent of the Son of Fear. Divinity was far more difficult to absorb than divinity. In the past, Vivian was forced to go into a deep sleep to absorb divinity. Although her power was much stronger now, it was a bit difficult to complete the integration of the divinity this year. From a demigod to a true god in a year. If it was someone else, it would definitely be a frightening speed, but it was still too slow for Soren. In a short time, Soren could only rely on his own strength to deal with changes. The seeds must be planted in advance to be able to harvest the rich fruits. Soren valued Saruman's potential. Perhaps it was not an ability in the field of battle, but his potential was very useful in the long run. Although there was a lot of land in the outer islands, it could not be compared to the mainland, and the land was not as fertile as the mainland. With the help of Saruman's power, he might be able to change a lot of the situation. The world was always changing. If Saruman had the potential to be cultivated, Soren would not be stingy with a little divinity to promote him. Since he planned to rush back to the outer islands, the trip to the eastern countries should be over for the time being. However, Soren still had an important task, and that was to find a way to kidnap the legendary puppeteer girl back. There was less than half a month left before the second wave of the Abyss demons. Soren decided to use a simpler and more violent method. That was to reveal his identity. He was going to send an invitation to the legendary puppeteer girl as a true god, asking her to travel to Mordor City, and then decide whether to further cooperate with Soren. If she was still unwilling to cooperate after going to Mordor City, he could only consider whether he needed to use force in the end. For now, the most important thing was to kidnap her back first. He was very lucky. When Soren returned to the first town again, the legendary puppeteer girl had already returned. This time, Soren did not hide his power, but directly came to her in the form of a saint, and told her the gap in strength and status in the most intuitive way. Your Excellency. When the two met again, the legendary puppeteer Alice finally understood the gap between the two. Although she had guessed Soren's identity and even went to see the Eastern Princess some time ago, when Soren's real identity appeared in front of her, Alice's face still couldn't hide her surprise. Damn! This was a true god. If it weren't for the outbreak of the Avatar, it would be unlikely for mortals to see the avatar of a god in their lifetime. What do you think of my proposal? Soren ignored the girl's surprised expression, but went straight to the point. Some of the knowledge you have is very important to me. And there is also a lot of knowledge in Mordor City that I think will be very useful to you. We found a wizard tower in the Shadow Plain, which is a relatively well-preserved wizard tower from the Arcane Empire. We also found a strange half-plane in the lock of the wizard tower. Recently, I also found an underground relic during one of my travels and brought out an elemental furnace that can function normally. I believe that as a puppeteer who has studied the knowledge of the Arcane Empire, you should know what I mean. This is a sincere invitation. If you feel that it is of no help to you after arriving at Mordor City, I can guarantee that you can leave at any time. In the name of the gods. In order to abduct this girl to Mordor City, Soren had spent a lot of money, and he even used the name of the gods as a guarantee. He was a god of the lawful alignment. Although he was inclined to the evil realm, if he didn't do this kind of thing, it would cause his own divine alignment to deviate. The gods couldn't deny themselves. The best result now was that the legendary puppeteer in front of him was very satisfied after arriving at Mordor City. Otherwise, if he forced her to stay in Mordor City, Soren might be in a dilemma. However, he still had a little confidence in this. After all, there was a lot of black technology stored in Mordor City. Lock. Wizard Tower. War Chess Plane. Elemental Furnace. Soren didn't believe that none of these things could attract the puppeteer girl in front of him. She had the black technology of the Arcane Empire in her hands, so she must know the power that this knowledge represented. Similarly, she would also be interested in other black technologies of the Arcane Empire. The mana power armor in the Wizard Tower was much more powerful than the girl's dolls she made. These girls' dolls were at most level 16, but the mana power armor was above level 21, and there was also a mana combat thaling above level 25. After listening to Soren's words, Alice was obviously lost in thought. Soren didn't lie to her. At least the spell to detect lies told her that Soren had just told the truth. So after learning that there were so many good things in Mordor City, she was quite tempted. However, leaving a familiar place and going to a more distant overseas area rashly. It wasn't that easy either. It was difficult for her to make a decision in a short time, and the attitude of the Eastern Princess was also uncertain, but Soren seemed to be in a hurry. The girl was a little hesitant for a while. So, she turned her eyes to the head maid, Lilith, who was listening carefully, and whispered, "Lilith, what do you think?" Unbelievable. She actually asked for the opinion of the girl doll she made for such an important thing. The head maid's expression was very serious. The strange silver-white metal was very soft and tough, which allowed her to show a very human-like expression. The head maid bowed slightly and said seriously, "If this mister can guarantee the safety of the master, maybe we can go to the place called Mordor City to have a look. Lilith also wants to see other high-level creatures, including the legendary Thaling." Thaling. This was an alchemy creature that could only be made by high-level legendary wizards. They were very powerful and smart high-level creatures. Thaling creatures could be seen in the south of the continent, and Thaling creatures were even rarer in the Eastern Kingdom, which was full of chaotic magic energy. Although the alchemy dolls made by the puppeteer were very delicate and powerful, they were still a lot worse than Thaling. Thaling was at least a legendary alchemy creature, and its ability was much stronger than these girl dolls. Alice couldn't help but fall into deep thought. After a while, she turned her eyes to Soren again, but not at Soren, but at another girl doll sleeping on his shoulder. She said seriously, "Chris, don't sleep in anymore. What do you think of Mr. Soren's proposal?" The divine doll named Chris slowly opened her eyes. She raised her silver-white little hand and rubbed her eyes as if she hadn't woken up yet. Then she muttered, "It's boring to stay in one place all the time. Maybe it's good to go out and have a look." "Alice, I remember you said last time that you wanted to travel to the astral plane. There are even places in the material plane that you haven't been to. Why don't you travel to the material plane first, and then consider going to the astral plane?" Unbelievable. The golem master girl named Alice had actually asked for the opinions of the golem dolls she had created. Moreover, these female dolls had even given her an answer with a straight face. At this moment, Soren was really curious about how she made these girls' dolls. Okay then. After listening to the two girls, Alice couldn't help but take a deep breath. Then she said seriously, "Mr. Soren, I'm willing to go to the outer islands with you. I hope it won't disappoint me." As soon as she said that, the head maid standing on the desk next to her, Lilith, moved and said with a serious expression, "Mollyze. Tilth. Linus. Get ready to pack up. And you, Chris. Don't be lazy. Since you've decided to go on a long journey, then pack up your own things." The other female dolls immediately started moving. They seemed to be a little lively at this moment. Not only did they pack up all kinds of things, but they also said with a slightly fluctuating voice, "Are we going on a trip? Can we see the sea? Mollyze. You should go pack up our things. Leave this to me." The group of girls happily busied themselves. The divine doll girl, Chrissy, who had been lying lazily on Soren's shoulder, also got up. She flew to the cabinet on the right side of the wall very seriously, then opened a small drawer, and then took out a set of clothes and shoes from it. They were all very small clothes, only the size of 2 or 3 fingers, but they were so lifelike. The workmanship was exquisite, and it was unknown which top tailor made them. Chris had a total of 3 sets of clothes, all of which were made uniforms, but the color was slightly different. The girl carefully folded these pocket-sized clothes and put them in a box that was half the size of Soren's palm. Then she flew back to the desk with one hand and cheerfully said, "It's done. I've finished packing my things." On the other side, The girl named Lilith also flew over. She struggled to carry a few small boxes and put them on the desk. Then she made a very anthropomorphic expression of wiping sweat with her hand. Although she was an alchemy life form, she did not sweat at all. This was the result of their learning from the outside world. They imitated the words and actions of humans, and gradually formed their own personal characteristics. It was said that alchemy life forms who stayed with humans for a long time were more likely to develop emotional characteristics, and they would not be as cold as machines. Soren was dumbfounded by what he saw. With the help of the group of girls, the luggage was quickly packed up. Alice put a thick book under her arm, then took out a heavy suitcase with one hand. First, she put many of her own books in it, then carefully put the small boxes that contained the girls' luggage on the side. Then she looked up at Soren and smiled gently. "It's done. We're ready. Let's go. P.S. This volume is finished. I'll start writing a new volume tomorrow." Chapter 760. The Frost Kingdom, Arendelle. As February approached, the spring of the Frost Kingdom was about to arrive. The snow on the roads had begun to melt, and as the temperature rose, the floating ice became less and less. People began to appear in the fields to get busy. Because of regional reasons, the crops in the Frost Kingdom were all in one season. They started sowing in February and March, and harvested in July and August. The remaining months of the year were used to plant other things. The royal family of Arendelle had ruled this land for a long time. If it had not been affected by the Avatar crisis, the tradition here would have lasted for a long time. On this day, the weather should be pretty good, but the weather could change as quickly as a woman's mood. It was the end of January. It was less than 4 or 5 days before the arrival of February. On this day, there seemed to be no change in Arendelle, but in the afternoon, there was a sudden exclamation from the people at the entrance of the market. Then many people looked up at the tower at the top of the palace, where a silver-white beam of light had risen. The light went straight into the sky for a while, and then slowly disappeared from everyone's eyes. What happened at the palace? People were puzzled. Many people were also alarmed by this phenomenon and inquired about the news inside the palace. About half an hour later, suddenly, a little girl's voice sounded at the entrance of the market, seemingly cheerful. "It's snowing." Pieces of snowflakes fell from the sky. At this time, the weather in the Frost Kingdom had warmed up. It was unexpected that there would be snow so close to the arrival of spring. Looking at the scale of the snowflakes falling, the snow would probably be quite heavy. "It's snowing. It's really snowing." The residents of Arendelle had long been accustomed to winter. They were not surprised by the arrival of the heavy snow, but they postponed their scheduled work for a few days. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. At the same time, at Port Tylon, the first stop on the way to the outer islands, Soren's figure had appeared at the port with a girl in a wide cloak. Half of the girl's face was covered, and only her fair and beautiful chin could be seen. She had a thick book under her arm, and a lifelike girl doll sat on her shoulder. Similar to the female puppeteer in front of him, the delicate female doll also looked at Port Tylon in front of her with curious eyes. From time to time, she would move a few times under the hood of the cloak, and then a small head popped out to look around, and then retracted under the command of the serious head maid. "Is this the Southern Sea region?" Alice looked at the bustling port with surprise. She whispered, "It is indeed much more prosperous than the Eastern kingdoms." The girl didn't let all the dolls come out. The one lying on her shoulder was Chris. It seemed that this divine girl could always get more indulgence and preferential treatment. Although the head maid was Lilith, Soren only recently found out that Chris was Alice's first doll. However, even Alice herself didn't expect her first product to be such a funny one. Since then, Chris had always been the most special one among all the female dolls. Port Tylon was indeed much more prosperous than before. But compared to Port Mordor, there was still a big gap. Soren just smiled slightly when he heard this. He didn't compare the two. Anyway, when Alice arrived at the city of Mordor, she would naturally feel the difference there. Soren still had great confidence in this city that he had spent countless efforts to build. Although the city of Mordor had only been established for a short period of time, relying on the huge infusion of resources, it had long been comparable to those cities that had been established for hundreds of years, and the vitality of the city was incomparable to other places. Wow! It's snowing. Come out and see. It's snowing. Chris looked around on Alice's shoulder. Suddenly, she looked up at the sky, and then flew up into the air. She happily circled around Soren and Alice, and said excitedly, "It's snowing. It's snowing. Lilith, come out quickly." The climate of the eastern kingdoms was similar to that of subtropical regions. The severe desertification made many places in the eastern kingdoms unable to see snow for decades. Alice also seemed to be in a good mood. The girl reached out and took off the hood on her cloak, then spread out her white palms to catch the falling snowflakes. Girl dolls and maid costumes flew out one by one. They were like flower fairies dancing in the snow quite happily. Even Lilith, who had always been strict, opened her palms to catch the snowflakes, and then looked at the distant sea with a very human-like expression. Is this the sea? These girl dolls had their own personalities, and Soren even felt that they had their own independent thoughts. However, at this time, Soren's attention was not here. When he realized that it was snowing, he could not help but extend his spirit to the sky, and then he found a fluctuation of divine power coming from the distant north. The Frost Kingdom. Arendelle, the palace. This fluctuation of power came from the Princess Royal. Soren had always remembered the unique fluctuation of power of the Princess Royal. The city of Modor. Gloria's figure came out of the laboratory. She looked up at the sky in confusion and murmured, "It's snowing? Why is it snowing all of a sudden?" The city of wizards. At the top of the towering tower, an old man with a snow-white beard came out. He reached out to catch the falling snowflakes, then stood on the astrology platform. After a while, he murmured, "What an unexpected snow." The Eastern Kingdom. In a large city called the Eastern Capital, in a magnificent palace, a charming woman lying lazily on a pure golden throne suddenly stood up. She was wearing an exquisite silk dress, which vaguely looked like an oriental dancer. This gorgeous woman with a beautiful face stepped barefoot in the air and appeared outside the hall in the blink of an eye. She looked up at the sky and spread her white palms to catch the falling snowflakes in the air. She frowned slightly and said, "The goddess of snow? Even the Eastern Kingdom has been affected?" It was a very peaceful day. There was almost no earth-shattering event, but on this day, it snowed in the entire material plane. White snow. Dark red blood. Fate seemed to have begun everything with poetry. Chapter 761. The Frost Kingdom, Arendelle, the Palace. Although the beam of light that rose in the sky only lasted for a short time, it still attracted the attention of many people. Princess Anna, who had begun to deal with the government affairs of Arendelle in the main hall of the palace, quickly noticed the abnormality. She realized that the beam of light was rising from the tower where her sister was staying, so she immediately put down the documents in her hand and walked towards the tower with a little worry. As the scope of the Avatar crisis was getting larger and larger, even ordinary people were aware of the abnormality. Now Princess Anna understood why Soren was worried about the future. Perhaps her beloved man had already foreseen the arrival of the Avatar crisis. From the moment the demons appeared, Princess Anna had officially taken over the government affairs of Arendelle. At present, most of the government affairs were handled by her. Princess Royal began to retreat after assisting Soren to kill the god of the hunt, Malor. After the demons appeared, she handed over most of the government affairs to her sister and devoted herself to the control of power. She had foreseen something. The Frost Kingdom was facing a huge challenge, and this challenge required her to have enough power to deal with it. "Sister." Princess Anna came to the door of the tower. She knocked gently on the door and then retracted her finger in surprise. The door was very cold, and the frozen ice could be seen through the crack of the door. At this moment, in the room of the tower, everything had been frozen. The figure of Princess Royal was standing in the center. As if she heard the sound outside the door, she opened her eyes and said slowly, "Anna? I'm fine. I'll be out in a while." Princess Royal waved her hand gently, and the ice in the room dissipated with the wind. This was caused by her overflowing divine power. After a while, Princess Royal slowly opened the door and smiled. "It's okay. It was just a small problem. Now that it's solved, we shouldn't encounter such problems in the future." Princess Anna relaxed a lot when she heard this, but her expression was still a little worried. She reached out and hugged her sister, and whispered, "What happened?" Princess Royal did not answer, but gently reached out and stroked Princess Anna's forehead. She gently shook her head and said, "It's okay. Let's go down for a walk." He did not know why. At this moment, Princess Royal felt much more amiable. She didn't give people the illusion of distance and rejection like before. Since the mysterious disappearance of Princess Royal, Princess Anna felt that her sister had become much more difficult to approach than before. She even had an inexplicable sense of crisis. Although she firmly believed that her elder sister would never hurt her, that feeling lingered. Now, Princess Royal no longer had that feeling. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. Her elder sister was still the same elder sister. A kind, peaceful, and warm aura. At this moment, the eldest princess let out a sigh of relief. After paying a certain price, she had finally resolved the crisis on her body. Ever since he mysteriously disappeared and returned, the power in her body was getting stronger and stronger, and in the end, she even showed signs of losing control. To put it simply, the amount of divine power she possessed had already exceeded the limits of what she could handle. For example, Princess Royal's divinity could not contain that much divine power. Soren's divine power could not keep up with the progress of the divinity's capacity. Princess Royal's divine power exceeded the upper limit of the divinity's capacity, so sometimes she could not control her own power. With her divinity's capacity, she could hold at most 200 or 300 points of divine power, but the divine power she possessed had reached more than 2 or 3 times. If it weren't for the fact that her profession level was above level 30 and she was a powerful warlock, Princess Royal's power would have been in trouble long ago. However, after killing Malor, the god of the hunt, Princess Royal had been supplemented by the power of the divinity. After completing the fusion, she had also increased the capacity of her divinity's capacity. But this was still not enough. After completely erasing the residual consciousness of the divinity, Princess Royal chose a more direct way to balance her divine power. That was to disperse the excess power. The pillar of light that had just risen was Princess Royal's excess divine power. If this divine power were to erupt directly, it would probably be able to freeze the whole of Arendelle. With Princess Royal's ability, it was not an exaggeration to say that she could freeze 1,000 miles. The royal family of Arendelle had always been regarded as the descendants of the ice goddess. They often awakened great power across generations. Princess Royal was one of the best, and the power she inherited was at the top of the material plane. In order to avoid the raging divine power from causing a devastating disaster to Arendelle. After completing a certain degree of divinity fusion, Princess Royal decided to disperse the excess divine power. She raised her divine power to the sky and turned it into ice and snow that covered a large area. This prevented her dissipating divine power from directly freezing Arendelle. It also solved the situation where she had too much divine power and could not control it. Sometimes, more power was not better. Only the power within one's control could one exert the greatest combat power. Moreover, these divine power did not belong to Princess Royal at all, but the divine power of ice and snow brought about by a fortuitous encounter. The ice in the room was the result of the dissipation of power. Princess Royal had been very careful to control her power, fearing that she would accidentally freeze the palace. Now she had finally dispersed the excess divine power. Although she felt quite tired, her expression seemed very relaxed. Now her combat power had not decreased but increased. The application of her own power had begun to move towards the realm of the gods. If she was willing to become a god, she might be able to directly advance to minor divine power. But Princess Royal's ambition was definitely not limited to this. She did not intend to become a god with minor divine power. It was not easy to advance blindly after becoming a god. Soren was a special case. She needed to accumulate enough power and then become a god above the level of minor divine power, or even directly become a god with intermediate divine power. Although the divine power that Princess Royal dispersed temporarily affected the climate of the material plane, there was no direct damage. However, it didn't cause any direct damage, which was undoubtedly the best outcome. What she needed to do next was to continue increasing the power of her quintessence. This was similar to Soren. The divine power that Princess Royal inherited was quite amazing, but the divine power was far from the requirements of her strength. However, Princess Royal had more obvious advantages than Soren. She had a clear enemy, Winter Maiden. This enemy's divine power could be completely absorbed by her because they were very compatible. As long as she defeated Winter Maiden, Princess Royal could reach the level of minor divine power at any time. Chapter 762. The heavy snow only lasted for one day. The next day was a big sunny day. This abnormal climate was called ice and snow mutation. Many people temporarily turned their attention to Arendelle, secretly inquiring whether the sudden heavy snow that affected the entire material plane had anything to do with the legendary Princess Royal. Soren didn't pay much attention to this, because he knew that this was caused by the Princess Royal. It seemed to be related to her huge divine power value. With the ability of the Princess Royal, the situation yesterday should have solved the crisis. Soren wanted to win over the legendary puppeteer girl, so he didn't mind stopping for a while to show his strength. In terms of the power of the material plane, Soren was confident that he would not be much worse than the Eastern Princess, so he needed to show his worth in front of Alice and try to win her over to his side as much as possible. If he had her help, the speed of studying the alchemy technology of the Arcane Empire would be much faster. The third day. Soren arrived at the city of Mordor. Alice was undoubtedly very shocked by the city of Mordor, which was more prosperous than Port Tylon. And when she learned that the city had just been built, the girl's expression was even more incredible. This was a special city. As soon as she arrived here, Alice felt the unique atmosphere of the city. It was full of vitality. Even the eyes of the lower-class civilians were full of hope for the future, unlike the numb eyes in other places. Well, the city was also shrouded in a strong fishy smell. Soren was also stunned when he came back. Although he didn't want to admit it, in fact, he still had a little bit of mysophobia. Otherwise, the planning of the city of Mordor wouldn't have been so much beyond this era. Many of the useless plans in the eyes of the indigenous people were to improve the environment of the city of Mordor. But now his city was shrouded in a strong fishy smell. Gloria didn't inform him of such a small thing as the migration of fish, so when Soren came back, he saw the whole port was hung up with dried fish. That sour expression. All right then. These trivial matters could be ignored. Since Soren had brought Alice back, the rest of the matters would naturally be left to Gloria and the fallen witch. They were the masters who had mastered the knowledge of the Arcane Empire. Whether or not he could keep Alice here would depend on the performance of these two legendary witches. Also, he had to hand over the mask he had obtained, which was engraved with the simulacrum spell, to them so that Gloria could analyze the spell much faster than Soren. The first meeting between the two sides was very friendly. Gloria was obviously very surprised by the small girl doll made by Alice. There was even a glimmer of light in her eyes. Such a cute and small girl doll was indeed very attractive. The first time he saw the laboratory in Motor City, the Sorcerer's Tower in the Shadow Plane, and the elemental furnace that was being rebuilt. Alice also had a shocked expression on her face, as if this trip had not been in vain. Soren was supposed to help settle and persuade Alice, and find ways to get the core knowledge she had mastered or traded. But on the first day he returned to Motor City, an important thing happened. This matter was so important that he had to put aside other things, including Saruman's adventure and so on, and concentrate on dealing with this important matter first. His men were dead. The one who died was an elite of the pirates in Motor City, a half-elf pirate at the level of a small leader. The moment this loyal pirate died, it alarmed Soren. Not only because he had a high status in Motor City, but also because he was a fanatic of Soren. He was the first fanatic of Soren to die. Since Soren became a god, he had absorbed a lot of believers, but there were not many who could be called fanatics. There was no doubt. Any fanatic was an important wealth for the gods. Even if the soul of this fanatic was not pure enough, the gods would not be stingy to promote a fanatic. The dead pirate's name was Mano. An inconspicuous name. He had participated in the Battle of the White Dragon and followed Soren to the Treasure Island. He was not strong. His profession level was only about 12. He had always been a middle-level officer in Motor City. This time, he was sent to the Wind Spear Hills to accept a mission. At the moment of his death, Soren had a strong feeling. The next moment, he passed the matter to Gloria with his mind, and then directly teleported to the center of the Great Temple. The gods had their own obligations. Soren's figure appeared in the temple. He looked at his own statue in front of him, then activated the holy form, and used a little divine power to infuse his spirit into the statue. Then, a hazy figure rose. It was Soren's shadow, and it also represented the incarnation of his soul. To guide the souls of believers. The Avatar crisis had officially begun, and the role of the Kingdom of God had been greatly weakened. If ordinary believers died, Soren would not care too much, because these souls might be guided to the Kingdom of God by themselves, or they might fall to other lower planes because their faith was not pure enough. The more souls in the Kingdom of God, the better. The scope of a god's kingdom was limited, and the resources were also limited. Only the greater the power of the god, the more resources there would be in the Kingdom of God. Therefore, devout believers and fanatics were always the priority. The soul of a fanatic could not be left to fate. When Soren realized that one of his fanatics had died, he immediately separated a trace of the god's incarnation to guide the soul of this believer. This was not a real incarnation, but a temporary incarnation of energy. Mortals could not see it with the naked eye. If it was not the time of the Avatar crisis, the soul of such a fanatic would generally be guided by the god's servant from another world. But now, because the situation inside the Kingdom of God was unclear, the gods were basically disconnected from the Kingdom of God, and there was almost no way to contact the god's servant from another world. In this case, Soren could only guide the believers himself. And it was also troublesome to find a place for the soul of a fanatic. Since the connection to the Kingdom of God was disconnected, Soren could not easily send the soul of a fanatic into the Kingdom of God for reincarnation, and the soul could not maintain its form for a long time. But no matter what should be done next, Soren could not let the soul of his fanatic go without a home. A sacred light appeared. Soren's projection disappeared from the temple in an instant, and the next moment, his figure appeared in the Wind Spear Hills. In front of him were more than 10 demon corpses, and 3 of them were obviously soldiers of the Mordor city. One of them was already dying and could die at any time. His pupils had been dilated, but when Soren's projection appeared, his dim eyes burst into an amazing brilliance. His lips moved slightly, but he had no strength to make any sound. The last 2 words he said were, "My lord." Chapter 763. Am I going to die? Mano felt that the power in his body was losing little by little with the blood. His consciousness gradually began to fade, and breathing became more and more difficult. The approaching death made the pain in his body gradually fade. He had begun to lose consciousness, but the power of faith made his spirit condense. He felt that a huge force was calling him. That was the glory of divinity. This was a very ordinary battle. Since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the battle between humans and demons had begun. As an officer in charge of the defense of the Wind Spear Hill, it was not the first time Mano fought with demons, but this time he did not expect the number of enemies to be so large, and they had no time to retreat and ask for help. They won. This seemed to be a matter of course because the city of Mordor had never failed. They had their own pride, which belonged to the powerful force of Mordor. Even if the opponent was far more numerous and powerful than them, they still won in the end. Yes. They won. Just like when they followed His Excellency Sauron to kill the White Dragon, followed His Excellency Sauron to defeat the other pirate kings, and followed His Excellency Sauron to Treasure Island. The army of Mordor was invincible. Manno felt that the vitality of life was leaving his body. His injuries were very serious. Breathing became so difficult. He tried to open his mouth to comfort his sad comrades, but in the end, he could not make a sound. These were all comrades who fought side by side with him. He did not expect that he would have to go to see his old brothers who had died in battle so soon. As a fierce pirate, Manno was not afraid of death. He just had a little regret in his heart because he had not witnessed the rise of Mordor to stand at the top of the world. He firmly believed that Mordor would become the greatest city in the material plane. It was full of hope and future. They had killed all the demons, but they also paid a heavy price. Only 3 people from a team of 12 finally rushed out of the encirclement. Relying on excellent equipment and tactics, they killed more than a dozen demons that chased them out. The comrades around him were already scarred. Death was getting closer and closer to Manno. He was so weak that he could not breathe, and his consciousness was gradually fading. This kind of injury was almost incurable. Unless there was a high-grade priest who could cast Restore on the spot, but it was almost impossible now. He simply couldn't hold on until then. The arrival of death made his spirit sublimate. His faith gathered the power of his soul. The moment his consciousness completely dissipated, he saw a golden light descending from the sky. A great golden figure appeared in front of him, smiling as he extended his hand. "My lord." Manno used the last of his strength to move his lips, but no sound came out. Then, he slowly closed his eyes. Death was coming. However, this was not the end for him, but a new beginning. Sauron's figure floated in the air. His expression didn't change much, and he wasn't sad because of the death of a fanatic. To him, this was just a new beginning. Manoa's mortal life had come to an end. However, what he was about to welcome was a new life, a new beginning. Mortals were unable to see him at this moment. The warrior in front of him who was holding Manno's cold body let out an angry roar. Then, he madly slashed the demon's body with his weapon, as if he was venting his anger. Another person slowly closed Manno's eyes, and then dragged his tired body towards the forest in front of him. Their fallen comrade was still in the forest. Sauron silently watched all of this. When Manno's life force completely dissipated, he slowly extended his hand, and then gently waved his hand. A hazy soul rose from the body and floated into his palm. Little bits of golden light appeared. This hazy soul gradually sublimated under Sauron's divine light, and the gray traces on the soul gradually faded away. Gradually, it emitted a faint golden light. As a fanatic, he was qualified to receive the power bestowed by Sauron. Sauron's figure rose into the air. He waved his hand towards the forest in front of him, and then 9 other hazy souls fell into his palm. These souls also began to change after falling into Sauron's palm. Little bits of gray traces disappeared, and traces of blood-red light faded away. It didn't matter if they were good or evil when they were alive. After their death, the light on their souls was wiped away by Sauron. All of this karma was borne by Sauron. This way, they could offset the pull of these souls from the lower planes. There were only 2 places for evil. One was the lower planes that contained the Baator Inferno and the bottomless abyss. The other was the kingdom of the god they believed in. Sauron was bearing their karma. Only by bearing the divine light that represented karma as a god could he allow these souls to be reincarnated into his kingdom. Little bits of white light appeared. Unlike Manno's soul, the other souls turned white when they came into contact with Sauron's divine light. Their good and evil deeds were wiped away, and they were now neutral souls. The lower planes would not be able to guide their souls, and Sauron could freely arrange where they would go. These souls were not fanatics. They were Sauron's followers. They were loyal, but not devout enough. If Sauron did not appear, these souls would have been led to the underworld and distributed by the servants of death. If Soren's kingdom was functioning normally, the god's emissaries would periodically take a portion of the souls from the god of death and lead them to the god's kingdom. Only the souls of fanatics and legendary professions could directly alert the god's emissaries and the god himself. These souls could only be personally led to the god's emissaries without going through the hands of the servants of death. This was because the devils could steal souls. Through the evil and loophole-filled contracts, the devils had been trying to steal the high-quality souls that the gods had not noticed over the long years. Even the gods had fought with the devils because of this. The gods of death were not as qualified as imagined, because there were too many souls that they needed to deal with. There were always some souls that were ignored, or it could be because of the secret deals with the devils. The gods' emissaries of death would always miss some souls, and then they would be taken away by the devils and devils. Because of the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the god's kingdom had now been disconnected. Now no one knew whether the god's kingdom was still functioning normally, or whether the order of the underworld was still maintained. Soren was not ready to leave everything to the servants of death. Since he was already here, he might as well take these souls away himself. These souls were all brave warriors. They did not retreat until the moment they died. They were a group of excellent seeds. A ray of light appeared. Soren's figure disappeared, and the next moment, he appeared in the temple. In his palm were 10 souls whose memories had faded. Death would gradually erase the memories of mortals. Only the most unforgettable memories could be left behind after reincarnation. Under normal circumstances, a mortal could only retain 1% of their memories after death. My lord. The figure of the high priestess appeared outside the temple. She bowed slightly to Soren. Soren turned his head and looked at her, then nodded gently. He spread out his hand and raised these souls, and then merged them into the light of the temple. The god's kingdom was not stable. In this case, Soren was not suitable to send these souls into the god's kingdom. So he planned to use his divine power to open up a small space in the temple, and then temporarily settle these souls in it. Relying on the power of faith gathered by the temple, these souls would gradually change. If their faith was firm, these souls would transform into the accompanying petitioners of the temple. They would attach themselves to the temple in the form of spirits until Soren found a place to settle them again. As for Mano's soul, he would merge with the light of the temple and transform into a higher level, heroic spirit. If he could merge with Soren's divine power, then this soul would gradually evolve into a Holy Spirit. In the future, it would be possible for him to become the god's emissary to receive souls for Soren. Chapter 764. Half-Elven Temple. When the 10 souls had been cleansed by the power of faith in the temple, Soren began to extract the accumulated power of the temple. With a wave of his hand, he opened a crack between the spiritual realm and the material realm. After all, the souls of the believers were not real-life forms. Soren could not directly turn them into petitioners in the material realm, so he kept the characteristics of the souls and did not create a new body for them. The creation of petitioners was very similar to the blood pool reincarnation in the bottomless abyss. Many gods used similar tools to convert the souls of their believers into new life forms. The quality of the other 9 souls was not good enough. However, as a fanatic of Soren, Mano's soul was quite pure. He was the kind of person who had a firm belief. If he did not die in the hands of the demons, then it was possible for him to become a high-grade profession or even become a legendary profession in the future. Considering that most of his current fanatics were still alive, and this was the first follower who had died and returned to his side in the form of a soul, Soren finally thought about it and stretched out his finger to tap on Mano's soul. 1 point of divinity was injected into the pale golden soul. My lord. As the light of divinity appeared, Mano's soul immediately changed greatly. It almost formed a physical body. However, this was only a half-physical body in the form of a heroic spirit. It was similar to a high-grade vengeful spirit. It could change between reality and illusion, but it was still a spirit in nature. The memories of the previous life had almost disappeared with the reincarnation. Currently, only a small part of Mano's memory was left. His faith began to become pure, and part of his fighting skills from the previous life would also be retained. Soren used his own divinity to turn him into a heroic spirit guardian of the temple. This kind of existence was similar to the great turmoil in the City of Wealth. At that time, the Temple of Wealth had a Saint Cardinal who was responsible for guarding it. He was also a fanatic cultivated by the Lady of Wealth. Your task from now on is to guard this place. A newborn heroic spirit needed to be relearned in a similar way to an adult with amnesia. Everything from the previous life had become a memory of the past. His task from now on was to follow Soren. If Soren were to fall, the heroic spirits that served him would fall as well. However, as long as Soren didn't die, these heroic spirits were almost immortal as well. Even if they died, Soren could find a way to revive them. This was because when Soren created him, he had already left behind the soul brand of his believer. Everything ended quickly. The high priestess watched everything silently. When Soren was done, she said, "My lord. These souls can be temporarily placed in the shrine. But if more and more believers die, I'm afraid the number of souls that the temple can hold will become quite limited. Besides, it's very difficult for the temple to support so many souls. After all, the temple was not a divine kingdom. The kingdom of God was an independent plane. It could draw elemental energy from other worlds, but the temple was completely supported by faith. Soren might have no problem placing 10 souls there. But what if there were 1,000 or 10,000 souls? The Avatar crisis was about to break out completely. Even the city of Mordor would not be able to escape this crisis. In the future, more and more believers would die. Without being able to connect to the kingdom of God, Soren could either leave these believers alone, or he couldn't find a way to settle them down. For a god, the number of souls that needed to be received was very large. If Soren left the souls of these believers alone, then he would have no foundation after the end of the Avatar crisis. So he had to find a way to settle the souls besides the kingdom of God. I know. Soren's expression gradually became dignified. As a new god, he was still imperfect in many aspects. This time, it was the death of the fanatics that alarmed him. Otherwise, for a long time, if his believers died, they could only go to the underworld and wait for the emissary of the kingdom of God to receive them, or flow into the river Styx, or be reincarnated to other planes. This was an invisible waste of resources. After all, many of Soren's believers were warriors of the city of Mordor. Most of these souls were good. After reincarnation in the kingdom of God, they could be used as combat power. In the future, if there was a war with other gods, the souls of Soren's believers could directly turn into an army. Let me think about it. Settling the souls of the believers became a top priority. Soren pondered for a while and said, "You stay in the temple. I may have a way to try." After that, Soren waved his hand again and took away a soul. That was the soul of a young warrior. Because of death, his consciousness had been blurred. Many souls were led to the river Styx in this way, and in the end, they couldn't remember anything. Interplane teleportation. With a magic aura, Soren's figure appeared in the bottomless abyss. As the plane barrier became weaker, it became much easier for Soren to go to the lower plane. However, the lower plane was very dangerous. A god with a high stealth ability like him was fine, but other gods were more dangerous here than in the material plane. The Abyss Blood Pool. This was Soren's goal. He had a very bold plan in mind, and this plan had been considered since the beginning. But today, he still needed to test it. A long time ago, Soren had considered descending his kingdom into the bottomless abyss. At present, his kingdom couldn't be connected, so naturally, there was no way to descend. When the Queen of Spiders descended into his kingdom, she was a mid-level god. Now, Soren had less than a 10% chance of not being attacked by others. His plan today was another one. Soren was going to use the Abyss Blood Pool to test the reincarnation of the believers. He wanted to see if he could directly turn them into demonic petitioners. This was something he had experience in. Because he had a powerful demon incarnation, his understanding of the demonic bloodline was much higher than many gods. Transforming a single soul required a lot of power. But now that he couldn't rely on his kingdom, he had to try it himself. A little white light appeared. What Soren wanted to do now was similar to a high-level demon. Some high-level demons, after obtaining high-quality souls, would not only use them to increase their power, but also turn them into their own subordinates. In short, this was a way to reshape the soul with the power of the bottomless abyss. There were two kinds of soul reincarnation. One was reincarnation through the abyss blood pool, which was the most common way. The other was direct reincarnation. Some of the strong souls would not go through the abyss blood pool to become demons. This required the power of the laws of the bottomless abyss. What Soren wanted to do now was to use his own power to create a petitioner. The power to create a petitioner could not rely on the laws of the bottomless abyss, so he needed to pay with his own soul energy. Or slaughter EXP, divine power points, soul energy, slaughter EXP. These three could be transformed. Soren could directly use slaughter EXP to convert divine power points in his divine form, but the ratio was too large. Saint form. As the soul of the believer emerged from Soren's palm, he also entered the saint form. Then his slaughter EXP and divine power points began to be consumed little by little. He began to create a demon body for the soul of the believer. Of course, this required the help of the demon incarnation because Soren was going to directly use a trace of the bloodline power of the demon incarnation as the core to create a demon. In the past, the Tanat demons were created by the demon Orbis in this way. As a god, Soren was also qualified to try to create a new kind of life. As long as it was not a change in life form, the gods could still do it. In the past, the great arcanists tried to create many were creatures. Note, The Origin of the Were Creatures, Volume 1, Prologue. Reshaping the body with the soul was definitely easier than directly transforming the body. Because the plasticity of the soul was the highest in the material plane, many souls could reincarnate on their own after falling to the lower planes. If Soren could create a new kind of demon, in the future, he could synchronize the reincarnation of all the petitioners after the kingdom of God descended to the bottomless abyss. The reincarnation of the believer's soul was not necessarily in human form. Some elves would become Ents after going to the kingdom of God, and some humans would become sub-sky angels after going to the kingdom of God. Soren killed the god of the hunt, Malor. Most of the petitioners in his kingdom were intelligent beasts, and these beasts were all reincarnated from believers of other races. In the kingdom of the Father of the Oak, there were many droll believers who died and reincarnated into Ents. Note, The Mystery of the Kingdom of God, Volume 3, The Form of the Petitioners. Chapter 765. Golumba Arena. Because of the rise of the demon incarnation, Soren also had a foothold in the abyss. The inside of the arena was the core area that was completely controlled by the demon incarnation. As for the towns built outside, they were managed by the demons. The most important thing in the abyss was power. As long as the demon incarnation's power could suppress the demons, then there would be no problem with power or wealth. Recently, the Golumba Arena was preparing for a large-scale death battle. The contestants participating in the battle were operated by the Yugalos. Not only did it include demons, devils, demons, and so on, but there were also elders from the elemental plane and humanoid creatures from the outer plane. This time, the battle even attracted a small number of tourists from the first layer of the abyss and the Shura realm. Watching the death battle was one of the few ways to entertain in the abyss. Personally participating in the battle was undoubtedly quite dangerous, and the Golumba Arena provided high-grade and above creatures to battle. Even for a legendary demon, this was a commendable form of entertainment. There was a more important point. The winner of the arena could often gain fame and status. Soren's way of operating in the dark was like this. He used fame and status to tempt high-grade powerhouses to join the death battle. Often, the winner of each battle could quickly gain fame through the Golumba Arena. Even the spectators who came to watch could spread their fame to the circle of demons, devils, other layers of the abyss, and even some circles of the Bator Inferno. Recently, even the powerful demon leaders nearby would come. For the winners of the arena, they didn't mind using better conditions to tempt them to become their subordinates. Fame. Profit. As long as they won in the Galumba arena, they could immediately gain rich rewards, and their fame could easily spread out. In this way, fame and profit were satisfied. It was precisely because of this that the Guruba arena had recently attracted demonic mercenary groups from other dimensions. They hoped to use the arena to make a name for themselves, and there were many demonic groups that had earned their own titles. Ripper, Rager, Bloodhand, such a title wasn't just for fun. To a large extent, it represented the corresponding status. Recently, there was even a newly risen soul catcher demon lord. He was a demon lord weaker than Sauron, and his territory was still far from Sauron's. In order to attract enough demons to submit to him, this legendary-level soul catcher demon lord personally participated in the death arena and recruited a group of demon subordinates and demon mercenaries. Sauron was setting the rules here. The most important thing at the moment was order. He needed to ensure that the order here would not be disturbed by any outsiders. This was also a tradition of Galumba arena. Traditions were often very important. There was a small blood pool in the depths of the Galumba arena. Blood pools were important reserve resources for demon lords because they could not always use their own power to transform souls after obtaining excellent souls. At this time, it was very important to use blood pools. This blood pool was very small. It was only about 5 meters in length and width. It was far smaller than the huge blood pool guarded by the Mother of Worms. The original Goblin Demon Lord used it to transform souls to enrich his army. At this moment, the demon incarnation rose from the magma and came to the side of the blood pool. Recently, the demon incarnation was preparing to break through the realm of Baylor Demon. For a long time, the demon incarnation needed to stay inside the volcano next to the arena and use the power of the magma to fuse with the power of the demon lord. Finally, it would evolve into a Baylor Demon. The demon lord could form a virtual divinity of a region, just like the control of a legendary wizard's virtual divinity in their own demiplane. What the demon incarnation was doing now was just like how a legendary wizard assimilated the laws of the demiplane. It was slowly assimilating the power of the laws in the territory it controlled. Let's begin. Soren slowly threw out the soul in his hand. The moment it touched the blood pool, a mysterious force full of unknown forces began to work. The soul was gradually distorted, and then it was assimilated by the blood pool and transformed into a mass of flesh and blood. The abyssal worm was taking shape. This soul was not very good, it had not reached the level of directly advancing to a middle or high demon. The abyssal worm was the basic form of all the monsters in the lower planes. It could even be said that it contained the original form of all the mutated genes of all demons, devils, and evil creatures. The abyssal worm could be used as currency in the lower planes. Whether it was demons, devils, or evil creatures, they could use the abyssal worm to hatch into their own kind. The future growth of the abyssal worm depended on the activation of the mutated tree, and then it would mutate into the basic form of demons, devils, or evil creatures. Every evolution of their own form was equivalent to starting from scratch. For example, if a level 10 Dretch evolved into a berserk demon, its level might be reduced to about level 7. However, its strength would definitely be stronger because of the difference in the basic form. The reduced part of the soul energy was used to reshape the body, and the extra power could be used to increase the level of the berserk demon. This was common to most demons, devils, and evil creatures. This was an incredible life form. The foundation of all this was because of the strong plasticity of the soul. Skip the abyssal worm form. Soren waved his hand and began to output his slaughter EXP. He directly used his divine power to help the soul of this believer break through the abyssal worm form. In the blood pool, a mass of flesh began to twist and change. Originally, it was about to become an abyssal worm, but soon the outline of a small humanoid creature appeared. The Dretch form. The starting point of all demons, the Dretch had the genetic tree to evolve into all demons. The blood pool and the bottomless abyss directly activated the basic genetic tree of demons, and other seeds were needed to activate the other forms of the genetic tree. Skip the Dretch form. The form of a low-level demon was not in Soren's consideration at all. This was the creation mode that determined the structure of his future kingdom. If he started from such a low starting point, what was the difference between directly falling into the bottomless abyss? With the quality of this believer's soul, it was too easy to reincarnate into a Dretch. If he was lucky, there would be no problem for him to become a berserk demon. He continued to output his divine power. Soren had spent more than 100,000 slaughter EXP. However, after the Dretch form, the demon genetic tree had been activated. With Soren's vision, he could see more mysteries, including the changes of the potential demon form. Unfortunately, it was a bit vague, but Soren was not helpless. Use slaughter EXP. Start data simulation operation. Record the mutated data of the demon form. Make the mutated model of the demon genetic tree. The ability of the divine level was activated. After the crazy flow of data, Soren's brain worked like a supercomputer, temporarily cutting off the connection with the temple and believers. Using the divine template as the foundation, he started to simulate the mutation of the demon genetic tree. Chapter 766. Gods were like supercomputers most of the time. Because they needed to maintain the spiritual connection of tens of thousands of believers. Although this was with the help of the faith network, inside the magic network, the foundation of the gods themselves was still very large. And this also needed to take into account the promotion of believers, the bestowment of divine spells, the feedback of faith, and so on. Every devout prayer of a priest was a connection with the divine network. Through the sublimation of spirit and faith, the priest could receive more power from the gods and master more advanced divine spells. Wizards had to rely on themselves to learn spells. Priests, on the other hand, had to learn divine spells from the gods. There was no need to learn. As long as they reached the standard of the gods, they could master several divine spells overnight. As for their learning, it was just to use and understand these divine spells more flexibly, not to analyze the structure of these divine spells in depth like the wizards. Soren was a supercomputer. Most of his computing power was used to maintain the connection with the faith network, which still relied on the mysterious data flow in his brain. Otherwise, his mind would be numb just dealing with the prayers of believers. It was also because of this that many gods would find opportunities to slack off in the long time because they were really tired of handling the prayers of their believers every day. Soren's ability was similar to a super-intelligent AI network. The unimportant prayers of believers were completely handled by the data, and other important things would disturb him. For example, the death of a fanatic. The divine form could understand the power of the law. When Soren activated the divine form, it could basically be understood as temporarily separating the operation ability from the faith network and using it in other more important places. There was no other way. Sometimes maintaining the faith network was really a burden, but no god could completely throw it away. Divine form. It was impossible to create life in the form of a saint. When Soren activated the data simulation, he immediately used his divine power to cut into the divine template. His vision instantly understood the plane and space, and he also cracked the mutation of the genetic tree in the body of the Dretch. Deep Lurk mutation, activatable. Quasit mutation, activatable. Succubus mutation, repel. Berserker mutation, activatable. Vrock mutation, activatable. Sturdy mutation, activatable. Berserker demon mutation, activatable. Fire demon mutation, insufficient potential. Glabrizu mutation, activatable. Soul judgment demon mutation, activatable. Six-armed Naga mutation, activatable. Assassin mutant, activatable. With the crazy data flow, a genetic tree built on the Dretch form also took shape in Soren's sight. The most basic structure of the entire genetic tree was the Dretch form. Every time he leveled up, he would need more power. This power could come from other demons, or it could come from the slaughter exp Soren gave him. A normal demon's advancement was promoted by the power bestowed by a superior demon, or the gradual accumulation of power in the midst of slaughter. The limit of Soren's Geno tree was Assassin Demon and Naga Demon. Legendary Balers were not in the Geno tree. They were probably stronger than Soren's God Spirit template, and he needed to increase his own God power to activate them. Souls had special characteristics. Some souls were very compatible with a certain demon form, and some souls were very resistant to a certain demon form. The soul compatibility of the believer in front of him was very high. Except for the succubus form, other demon forms seemed to be possible. This was a soul seed with potential. Soren could directly promote it to a higher demon with some power. However, this was not what Soren wanted. What he wanted to create was not a demon, but a petitioner for the future kingdom of God. A petitioner based on the demon Geno tree. Soren would not go to the upper realm. Therefore, the angelic Geno tree was not in his consideration at all. At present, there was no way to obtain the angelic, beast, and treant Geno trees from the upper realm. The characteristics of the reincarnation of souls must be compatible with the laws of the realm. The petitioner must be a humanoid creature. Soren first found the first element. First of all, the residents of his kingdom of God should not be beasts, treants, monsters, constructs, or other life forms. Because the god of hunting was an intelligent beast, many of his believers were reincarnated as beasts in his kingdom. Most of the creatures in the wild were beasts. Since it was a humanoid creature, some demon forms could be ruled out. Soren's eyes finally fell on the form of the flaming demon that lacked potential. This was a good seed for power. Try to activate the flaming demon form. The demon incarnation came to the side of the blood pool, cut open his palm with his sharp nails, and injected a drop of blood essence into the flesh in front of him. The form began to change. Soren's slaughter exp was consumed at an alarming rate, and the flesh in front of him quickly turned into a human form. At the same time, there were burning flames around the body. What I need is not the flaming demon. The flaming demon is just the basic form. I must integrate the characteristics of the petitioner. A golden light of divinity appeared in Soren's pupils. With the consumption of divine power, his whole body also floated in the air and instantly activated the power of his divinity. Change form. The flesh in front of him gradually changed. The bones, veins, and skin were all transformed under the power of the divinity. This feeling was like creating a human out of thin air. Soren used the demon incarnation as a standard to transform the reincarnation in front of him. A strong skeletal frame. It was about 2 meters tall, with a humanoid face, with a small number of demon features, dark red demonic skin, with a demon tattoo similar to that of the flaming demon. There was a powerful mutation in the demon genes. What Soren was doing now was to use his divine power to guide it in the direction he wanted as much as possible. However, some things still appeared because of the demon genes. Even if he forced it to be distorted, it would only be a bad thing. Finally, after consuming a lot of slaughter exp and divine power, a 2-meter tall body with dark red skin, a facial outline similar to that of an elf, a demon horn on the head, and a little sarcoma on the back of the spine appeared. It looked 70 to 80% similar to the demon incarnation. The sarcoma was an unfinished demon wing. The foot was the part that Soren could not guide. It looked like the hooves of cattle and sheep, and the other parts were very similar to the demon incarnation. It took shape. The first petitioner form that Soren created with his divine power took shape after it was compatible with the power of the law of the abyss. Now it depended on whether the soul of the believer could be integrated into it. Chapter 767. The petitioner's new form was stabilizing. Meanwhile, Soren was deep in thought. As a god, there were many things he needed to consider. Death was an unavoidable fate for mortals. There were only 3 paths after death. The first was to have one's soul completely disappear, which was the most tragic outcome. The second was to fall into the river Styx and be washed into the depths of the source sea to be remolded. It was like a pile of scrap paper being crushed and made into a new piece of white paper. The third was to have one's soul reincarnate. Whether it was in the upper or lower realms, reincarnation was the best outcome after death because it represented a new possibility. Although it might be the beginning of a difficult life for the weak. There was also an absolute non-believer. These people were actually quite rare. It was rare to meet someone who had no faith at all. Pantheon was common in the multiverse. In the past few hundred years, there had been no non-believers who were plastered to the wall. In order to avoid such a fate, even those who hated the gods would recite a few sentences verbally. As long as they recited a few sentences, they would no longer be considered non-believers. The multiverse's laws were much more tolerant of these people. Most of them were souls that were washed into the source sea by the river Styx. Among reincarnations, entering a god's kingdom was the best. If they were reincarnated in another realm, they would be like wild beasts that had no one to protect them. Their life and death depended entirely on luck. The upper realms were slightly better, but the lower realms were completely tragic. Many people who didn't have a strong enough faith but had a clear alignment would automatically reincarnate to other realms. The evil ones would reincarnate to the Bhator Inferno or the bottomless abyss. The good ones would reincarnate to Mountain Paradise or the Paradise. Those who had a special alignment might end up in the gray wilderness or the wild wilderness. These souls who didn't have a strong enough faith were reincarnated in the wild. They would be reincarnated as wild beasts and would retain some memories based on the purity of their souls. Most reincarnated souls would retain some memories, but the proportion was relatively small. Only legendary masters could remember a little of their past life clearly after reincarnating, while holy spirits could remember most things. The soul was still the same soul. It was just that after changing its life form, it would lose part of its memories. Next. This was the most important reincarnation of the believers of the gods. This was the best place to return to. Even the followers of evil gods could have a higher starting point after reincarnation than other creatures. More importantly, they were the lambs that the gods were herding. The gods had the obligation to protect these reincarnated petitioners. They would not be killed for no reason. They had a higher starting point and could live a longer life. It was possible for them to obtain a higher status in the divine kingdom through their abilities. The divine kingdoms of the upper planes were undoubtedly very beautiful. However, very few people could enter it. Most mortals wanted to go to Mountain Paradise, but less than 1 in 10,000 people were qualified to go. Soren needed to decide on the structure of the kingdom of God. This was because his church had not yet begun to describe their God kingdom to their followers. Telling them what the inside of the God kingdom was like was a very important part of a church. Even the gods of the evil alignment would try their best to shape their divine kingdom to make it more attractive to their believers. The Queen of Spiders was cruel, wasn't she? Although there were terrible spider elves and wax demons in her divine kingdom, there were also normal drow petitioners in her divine kingdom. They occupied the ruling position in the divine kingdom, lived a better life than the mortal world, and enjoyed the joy of enslaving many creatures in the divine kingdom. Many terrible monsters were distorted because of the punishment of the Queen of Spiders. If a drow matriarch who had faithfully pleased the Queen of Spiders entered the divine kingdom after death, she might be directly given the same status as in her previous life and continue to serve the Queen of Spiders for a long time. This was the structure of the divine kingdom. Soren needed to consider this. The form of the main creatures in the divine kingdom was the most important part of the structure of the divine kingdom. In other words, Soren needed to consider what type of race would be the core of the divine kingdom in the future. Whether it was the undead, demons, angels, or treants, the divine kingdom must form an orderly pyramid structure. What he needed to do now was to divide the pyramid. The growth potential of the petitioners was far less than that of other creatures. Having a higher starting point would make the foundation of the divine kingdom more stable. Deactivate the divine form. As Soren retracted his divine power, the divine light that shrouded his body gradually disappeared. Using the power of divinity cost a lot, so it was best not to use it if possible. the reincarnation in front of him had taken shape. It had the bloodline ability of a demon, but it was integrated with Soren's divine power. This was the most basic sample. If Soren wanted to construct the life structure of the divine kingdom in the future, he would need it as a foundation. Data simulation starting. Calculating the potential data of the reincarnation. Although they were all humans, their attributes were different. The potential of the reincarnation needed to be estimated roughly. Soren had to figure out the potential of this form. A row of data appeared in front of him: species, petitioner, demon modified life, level, creature level 7. Attributes: strength 15 to 21, dexterity 18 to 25, constitution 15 to 20, intelligence 10 to 18, wisdom 12 to 18, charm 5 to 18. Natural ability: demon skin, fire resistance, otherworld life. Special ability: flame, sacrifice. Data simulation completed. Following the simulation of the divine level, the potential of the reincarnation in front of him was calculated. As the basic form of otherworld life, most petitioners had a much higher starting point than mortals. However, their growth potential was slightly lower than when they were alive. If the soul was not pure enough and the body was not strong enough, many petitioners' initial abilities would be their strongest form in the future. The higher the starting point, the better. Therefore, the basic attributes of the angelic reincarnation form in the upper realm were very strong. Strength fluctuates between 15 and 21. This should be the strengthening of the demon bloodline. It's much higher than a mortal's strength. Dexterity can reach a maximum of 25 and a minimum of 18. Although it can't be compared to the angelic form, many of its abilities can reach more than 20, its combat power should not be weak. Angelic reincarnation has high requirements for the soul. Constitution is okay. Intelligence potential is average. Perception is good. Charm is slightly lower, but it doesn't matter. The data simulation showed the highest and lowest fluctuations. Their attributes were not bad, but this was the starting point of their natural creature level 7. In other words, the moment they completed their reincarnation, they would have a natural creature level 7. This was the reincarnation done by Soren himself. If it was expanded into the kingdom in the future, their natural creature level might be lowered to around level 5, and some of their attributes might be lowered by 1 or 2 points. If that's the case, in the future, most of the petitioners in the kingdom will be able to gain around 20 points in dexterity. There were upper and lower limits to the attributes of the petitioners. For example, the range of attributes of humans was the most average among all the races. The range of all the attributes of humans fluctuated between 3 and 20 points. The lower limit was very low, but the upper limit was also very high. The advantage of the petitioners was that the lower limit was very high. There would not be any weak or mentally handicapped people. However, the upper limit of some attributes was not as high as that of humans. The highest attribute of the elves was dexterity, which fluctuated between 8 and 25 points. The highest attribute of the dwarves was constitution, which fluctuated between 10 and 25 points. The higher the attribute fluctuation, the lower the probability. A golden radiance appeared. Under Soren's power, the soul began to gradually synchronize with the body. The reincarnation that had just been completed in front of Soren was like the transformed demons in the wilderness. Its expression was quite blank, as if its self-consciousness had not been fully integrated. Many souls that were reincarnated in the abyss would wander around unconsciously for a period of time. However, as a life created by Soren, the reincarnated body in front of him recovered a trace of its memory in a short period of time. It knelt down before Soren and said, "My lord." It had forgotten many things. It could not even remember its own name. However, as a believer of Soren, it still remembered that Soren was the god it served. It also remembered the battle experience it had accumulated over a long period of time in its previous life. Rise. Soren looked at the reincarnated body in front of him. He was a special individual with the characteristics of petitioners, but he was not assimilated by the god's kingdom, so he would not be trapped in the god's kingdom and could not leave easily like the latecomers. Let me see your innate ability, Soren said slowly. This reincarnated body used the bloodline of a demon's incarnation. It could be said that it had inherited a trace of the Balrog's power, but it was hard to say how much it could reach. Yes. My lord. The reincarnated body obeyed Soren's orders. It pondered for a moment as if it was familiarizing itself with its body. Then, a trace of fire appeared on the demon tattoo on its body, and its entire body was enveloped in a ball of fire. Body of flames? No. Its energy is decreasing. This is not the body of flames that can be activated permanently like the Balrogs. It's more like a temporary ability. Soren did not ask it to stop. The reincarnated body kept the flames burning on its body. This process lasted for about 5 minutes, and then the flames on the reincarnated body disappeared. It looked rather tired, as if it had used up a lot of energy. It really is a temporary ability. Although it's not as effective as the Balrog, it's already very powerful as an individual. The reincarnated body's ability was similar to the halo of sacrifice. It consumed its own mana to form a ball of fire around its body. On the other hand, the flaming demon and the Balrog were permanent passive abilities. If it was necessary, the reincarnated body could be enveloped in flames. This is the initial ability. If other petitioners reincarnate in the future, what abilities and innate abilities they get will depend on the characteristics of their souls. Soren had only created a body template. The strength of the soul could bring about some other abilities, and it could also give some special abilities. These were all different from person to person. This was why the gods, demons, and devils liked the souls of the strong. Which weapon do you want to use? Although the reincarnation process was completed, the test was not over. Soren threw out many different weapons, and then said to the reincarnated body in front of him, "Try and see which one is more suitable for you." Weapon mastery. There were 2 conditions that determined this. One was the weapon he was used to in his previous life, and the other was the god's special inclination. Just like how Soren's priest was born with the curved sword. The reincarnated body's memory was still blank. He did not understand what Soren wanted to do, but he would carry out his orders loyally. He walked in front of the weapons, picked them up one by one, and finally chose a heavy curved sword. As expected. The petitioner's weapon inclination is influenced by the god's favorite weapon. The reincarnated body wasn't very flexible with other weapons, but he was abnormally comfortable with the scimitar. As though he felt that one scimitar wasn't enough, he picked up a second one and could easily use it with both hands. Could it be that he has the potential to master dual wielding? The Balrog was born with dual wielding weapons. One was a whip, and the other was a sword. The reincarnated body in front of him seemed to have inherited the potential of dual wielding, which meant that it would be easier for him to master the dual wielding ability. Follow me. You need an opponent to test your combat ability. Soren needed complete and detailed data analysis and statistics. He directly brought the reincarnated body to the outside of the Galumba arena. Then, the demon incarnation brought the reincarnated body an opponent. A monster level 6 berserk demon. The berserk demon weighed more than 1,800 pounds and had an obvious advantage in strength. After receiving the order from the demon incarnation, it immediately rushed toward the reincarnated body. Rumble. The ground trembled slightly. In the moment when they clashed, the reincarnated body awkwardly dodged the enemy's attack. He was still not used to fighting. However, his agility was very high, reaching more than 20 points. This meant that he was quite flexible. Continue. Soren's expression was cold. He was not worried that the reincarnated body would die. He had enough confidence in his modified life form. If he could not even defeat a berserk demon, it meant that the reincarnated body was a failure. Clang. Rumble. Facing the berserk demon's crazy attacks, the reincarnated body began to retreat. However, after dozens of exchanges, he gradually began to counterattack. He even successfully stabbed the berserk demon's neck. His combat ability from his previous life was awakening. It was as if he was born with some simple combat skills. The situation gradually changed. The reincarnated body quickly discovered his advantage and began to use his extraordinary agility to fight the enemy. The berserk demon's injuries were getting worse. When a flaw appeared in its attack, the reincarnated body roared and stabbed the enemy's heart with his curved sword. The battle ended. The reincarnated body looked very miserable. His body was covered in mud, but he was not injured at all. Looks like I succeeded. His potential is greater than I thought. Maybe I can use him as a blueprint for the future kingdom of God. Thinking of this, Soren could not help but look at the reincarnated body in front of him with satisfaction. The future. The core of the kingdom of God's army would be like this. P.S. 2 in 1. Chapter 768. The light of dawn rose. Gloria slowly stood up, moved her slightly uncomfortable arm, then reached out and stroked her abdomen. Her expression was a little confused and dazed. After all, the physical fitness of a wizard was not comparable to that of a melee profession. Seeing Gloria get up from the heavy pile of books, Alice also stood up and moved. On the 1.5-meter-high pile of books was the divine doll Chrissy, who was sleeping. Next to her was the doll-maid group, who was busy organizing pieces of white paper full of dense characters. Sister Gloria. Have you finished your research on the magic power device? Alice stretched her waist beautifully, and the girl's beautiful curves were immediately exposed. She looked a little tired and said slowly, I have completed 1/3 of the structural analysis of Thaling. I think I can finish it in a week. It was a wise choice to come to Mordor. Alice thought so in her heart. Soren and Gloria were not difficult to get along with. Although Fallen Witch looked a little dangerous, they did not particularly reject her. The most important thing was that there were many things in Mordor that were very attractive to her. As a legendary puppeteer, all her energy was now devoted to the study of magic power devices and Thaling rune life. The two sides had some exchanges, and they felt that they had gained something after just a few days of getting along. Alice felt that she could consider making a Thaling rune life herself after completing the study of Thaling. Gloria also gained a lot. Alice mainly provided the technology of miniaturization of rune life, and how to use the abilities of the rune life. It was all knowledge that Alice found in the ruins of the Arcane Empire. Unfortunately, the library she found at that time was seriously damaged, and some of the knowledge had been lost. At present, the research work of the elemental furnace was mainly handed over to Fallen Witch. They were responsible for the advanced rune life. Soren hoped to build a powerful golem army, and the two legendary witches had put a lot of effort into this. Yes. It's almost done. Gloria withdrew her hand from her abdomen and said slowly, I'll give you the structure of part of the spell models this afternoon. With that, she walked out of the room. After walking out of the laboratory, Gloria placed her white palm on her abdomen again. She frowned slightly and murmured, Why is it that I can clearly feel the aura of a new life, but there's no movement in my stomach at all? Could it be that they aren't bred according to the lifespan of mortals? Different species. The cycle of reproduction was naturally different. Humans took 10 months to conceive, elves took 1 year and 3 months, dwarves took about 12 months, and orcs only needed 8 months. As for the other humanoid species, their reproduction speed was even faster. Gnolls only needed 6 to 7 months, while goblins needed around 3 months. Sometimes, they could give birth 3 times a year. The difference between other oviparous life forms was even greater. The lizard men and kobolds reproduced very quickly, but they also needed time to hatch. Generally speaking, goblins and kobolds were the easiest to reproduce among intelligent creatures. They could give birth to at least 2 waves in a year. A half-elf's pregnancy cycle was 11 months. Under normal circumstances, Gloria's stomach should be bulging by now. However, there was no change in her belly at all, and her figure was still so graceful. The only explanation was that this child was not calculated according to the lifespan of a mortal. If it wasn't calculated according to the lifespan of a mortal, the time needed would be very difficult to estimate. Goddess of Agriculture. She was the goddess that Soren had an alliance with. She was the descendant of a true god. Her mother was Mother Gaia, and her father was the god of light. She was born in Mother Gaia's stomach for hundreds of years. A true god who was born with minor divine power. Gloria was a little distressed now, but also a little relieved, because the current situation was really not conducive to the birth of the child. The outbreak of the Avatar crisis was getting more and more intense, and they themselves were not in an absolutely safe environment. While there was still some time, Gloria got up and went to check on Vivian. The little princess of Mordor City had an independent courtyard, and the gate was guarded by a huge Quetzalcoatl. Lulu had recently been learning combat skills from a drow warrior. Therefore, no one usually came to this courtyard. Gloria had also specially set up a formation to prevent others from affecting Vivian's fusion with the godhead. She walked into the spacious courtyard. The Quetzalcoatl, who was in charge of guarding the door, looked up at Gloria for a moment and then very meekly lowered its head. Gloria stood outside the door and took a few glances before leaving. Fusing with divinity wasn't an easy task, and Soren had set up a protective barrier around the room. Compared to the fallen witch, who was focused on research, Gloria still needed to deal with the affairs of Mordor City regularly. She was the mistress of Mordor City. In the absence of Soren, Gloria needed to approve the documents in the council hall every week and regularly deliver Soren's plan to the officials of Mordor City. Although it was rumored that the relationship between Soren and Princess Anna was very ambiguous, the only mistress of Mordor City was Gloria. She was very popular in Mordor City. At this time, the sky had gradually brightened, and there was the sound of patrolling guards changing shifts outside. At this moment, a dazzling light suddenly appeared in the northwest sky. This light was like a meteor streaking across the sky. In the process of falling, there was a violent collision. This energy constantly flowed into the bodies of the wild beasts, and soon, some incredible changes happened to them. Their expressions became more and more human, and their eyes became more and more lively. They even constantly communicated with each other as they moved forward. Yes. They were communicating with each other, as if they were intelligent creatures. A speck of holy silver-white light appeared. In the periphery of the northwest wilderness, the hazy incarnation of the Lady of Silvermoon appeared here, and behind her was the moon gate that was slowly closing. The god of the hunt, Malor. The Lady of Silvermoon's expression was quite dignified at the moment. She looked at the falling light in the distance and murmured, "Has his kingdom fallen? But why did it fall to the mortal world? His kingdom was not destroyed in the astral plane, but fell to the material plane. Is all of this a coincidence?" The Lady of Silvermoon fell into deep thought. While she was thinking, a powerful attraction came from the depths of the northwest wilderness, constantly attracting the wild beasts around. The closer these wild beasts were to the depths of the wilderness, the more obvious their wisdom became. In the end, even the figure of the winter wolf appeared. Intelligent beasts. This was the power of the god of the hunt, Malor, and the divine power he had accumulated over a long period of time. When Soren killed the demigod vampire, the kingdom of the original god of half-elves and rogues had begun to fall. After the death of this weak god, the kingdom was quite unstable, and it was almost on the verge of falling. At that time, Soren took over the priesthood, and soon officially became a god, which prevented the original kingdom of the half-elves from falling. Note, when officially becoming a god, Soren connected to the original kingdom of the half-elves and received divine feedback. The god of the hunt, Malor, was dead. He died in the hands of Soren, and Soren did not inherit his core priesthood. Malor was an intelligent beast, and his kingdom was also composed of personal knowledge. It was not as balanced as the kingdom of the Lady of Silvermoon. In addition to were creatures, elves, and humans, it also accepted some other forms of life. The kingdom of the god of the hunt, Malor, only accepted one form. That was beast form. The god of the hunt, Malor, was in the form of a beast, so if the believers in his kingdom were reincarnated as intelligent beasts, almost most of the petitioners were beasts after reincarnation. His kingdom was very close to the gray wilderness plain. If a god fell, the divine kingdom would gradually collapse. The speed at which this happened could be fast or slow, mainly depending on the structure and size of the divine kingdom. There was also a moment when a plane would meet its end. If no one took over the divine kingdom of the god of the hunt, Malor, then the divine kingdom would gradually fall. It could hit some planes in the astral plane, or it could collapse and be destroyed directly in the astral plane. What happened in front of them was a very small probability. The kingdom of the god of the hunt, Malor, fell into the mortal world, and it was not completely destroyed. The remaining power of the kingdom turned the northwest wilderness into a half-bit wall structure. The kingdom became a temporary half-bit wall attached to the northwest wilderness of the main material plane. This process, it would continue until the power of the kingdom was exhausted, and then the half-bit wall formed here would gradually disappear. This kind of thing had happened before. The dimensional fortress of the wizard's city suddenly came, and the great wizard who had been wandering in the astral plane for hundreds of years returned. The half-bit wall space hit the wall of the wizard's city and formed an independent bit wall passage. This news even shocked Soren. A broken space. With a silver-white light, the figure of the Lady of Silvermoon appeared on a vast grassland. The earth had cracked. The ground in front of her cracked open a crack that was hundreds of kilometers long, and flowing magma could even be seen in the depths of the crack. Everything around looked a little distorted, and the space was strangely broken. Metaphorically speaking, it was like a mirror that was broken and then put together again. The scene in front of her was like a reflection in a broken mirror. There were cracks at the edge of the space, and these cracks were gradually collapsing the whole world. Many corpses of beasts could be seen on the grassland. Wolves, tigers, leopards. There were some other beasts. They were not real beasts, but residents of the kingdom, petitioners of the god of the hunt, Malor. These were all intelligent beasts reincarnated from souls. Some were even very powerful, but under the disaster of the collapse of the kingdom, even the petitioners of the Holy Spirit level might not be able to survive. The whole kingdom was dying. The boundary of the bit wall was gradually shrinking. The Lady of Silvermoon glanced at the corpses of the beasts on the ground, and then moved into the depths of the grassland. She was not sure how long this kingdom could last. But before the kingdom was completely destroyed, she still had some things to do, because most of the wealth of the gods was kept inside the kingdom. The kingdom was an independent world. The laws of the bit wall here were not favorable to her, and there might be oracles and servants of the god of the hunt who survived. She had to hurry. Exploring the kingdom of another god, even if that god had already fallen, was no less dangerous than fighting an ancient red dragon alone. God knows what the hell was in the kingdom of the god of the hunt that had been running for thousands of years. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.